My name is Daniel Mercer, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. The first thing you should know is that the stones at the Alamo sweat after midnight. They don't sweat like a man does. The shine doesn't gather and drip. It simply trembles there in the light like a thought about to form, a bead of something at the edge of memory. You could call it condensation if you wanted a mundane word. You could say the limestone breathes. But when you touch it, you feel a pulse. When you bring your ear close enough, you hear something like a seashell's whisper, except it isn't the ocean. It's boots. It's commands. It's the sound of a line tightening. I'd taken the job because the night shift meant quiet. That was the sales pitch the contractor gave me. Quiet, simple routine, steady pay. I'd been spinning out since my divorce, running a short fuse at a grocery warehouse and then at a smaller tourist attraction, where I pretended the animatronic voices didn't wake me up in my dreams. I told myself I needed something older, something that would hold me in place. The Alamo felt solid. It had stood still while everything else moved, and that made it feel like a sort of anchor you could tie your days to. My badge said, maintenance technician, but that's a fancy way of saying janitor. I changed refuse bags, kept the drinking fountains from sputtering rust, mopped the chapel's stone floor in long, patient swaths that made my shoulders ache in the good way. I swept the courtyard in the same pattern each night, starting at the north wall and working toward the chapel, so that I pushed the day's grit into a neat line. I learned the sound of each gate latch, the lie of each stone. You learn a place when you're the one who keeps it clean. You learn the place, and sometimes you learn its secrets. The first week, all I felt was heat. Even at night, San Antonio keeps a hand on your neck. You walk out of a cold building and a layer of warm air slides across you like a snake shedding skin. The stars tremble a little with the heat above the plaza, and the trees along the street gather whispers from people strolling after late dinners. Even when the floodlights shut off and the perimeter lamps alone draw shadows thin as gauze across the courtyard, the warmth holds. It turns everything soft and slow. I grew to like it. Inside the chapel, the air was cooler, and the dim in there felt clean. The walls wore their history with the humility of old fighters. The chips and bullet scars were not dramatic, only present. The way your grandfather's knuckles tell stories without moving his mouth. I polished display cases whose glass held muskets and letters and buttons that had once been the exact center of someone's world. I felt almost reverent. To rinse a mop in that place and wring it out so the water made that quiet twisting sound was to take part in something like a liturgy. 2 a.m. was my favorite hour. The city's noise had thinned to the vague hush of rubber on asphalt a few blocks over. Cicadas rasped along the hedges. My radio stayed silent on my belt because Raphael, the night guard who liked to joke he was head of things that go bump, made his final sweep at 1:30 and then took his coffee in the visitor center, which left me with the courtyard and the chapel all to myself. There's a kind of trust you come to feel in a place like that, a hush you don't want to disturb with your own voice. It's like sitting at a bedside when someone dear is asleep, watching their chest rise and fall. That's the night it began to change. The first Thursday of June, heat lightning skittering so far off it looked like a thought behind the clouds. I was sweeping the courtyard, careful not to crush a line of ants ferrying treasure in the crack between stones, when the hush tugged at my ear. I stopped, listening to nothing because that's what I expected to hear. Instead, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the hour or the heat or the city beyond the gates. Boots. Not the hard stamp of a modern soul, but a duller beat. Heel and toe with weight and pause and wait again. A rhythm I didn't know I knew until I knew it. It came from the long shadow the chapel threw across the courtyard. It was measured, deliberate. I could have said it was a trick of echo, the city catching and sending something between buildings, except what I heard was inside the walls. It was laid into the stones. It was as if the floor remembered I did not call out. You don't call out to the empty when you hear something like that, you wait. Because if something answers, you have to be okay with the answer. The steps slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed had a shape to it, like the world was listening for my breath. I set the broom gently against the wall and put my hands at my sides as if I were walking into a church service. Then I walked to the chapel door. I will tell the truth as I lived it, my hand shook on the handle. I had no reason to be that afraid, no rational one. But fear is often rational for the body even when the mind is busy writing it off. The handle was cool. The door gave with a soft kiss of wood swollen by years. I stepped into the dark. Dark isn't all one color. In the chapel, there was the dark under the arch, where the bones of architecture hold a quiet you can almost hear. There was the softer darkness around the pews, where shapes stack and become a suggestion of bodies at prayer. There was the clean, thin dark of the altar rail. I had shut off the main lights because the hall always looked better to me in its low mode at night. The flag behind the altar hung heavy. I took one step in and the air changed. It cooled the way water cools when you sink your hands into it. The hairs on my forearms stirred. Somewhere to the left, near the fourth pew, someone exhaled. I wish I could say I squared my shoulders, but I don't remember what my body did. I know only that I took another step, and the echo of it came back to me out of time like there were two versions of my footfall. The second was slower, heavier, and I realized too late it wasn't mine at all. Boots moving again. Down the center, toward the altar, a sound followed, metal kissing stone. The soft clack of a musket butt set down. Then a voice, not loud and not theatrical, only exhausted and resolved. Hold. Just that. A word that is a command and a prayer and a promise you make when the line behind you is gone, and the ones on either side are all that's left. The flag rippled without a breeze. A smell leaked into the space. Sulfur, charcoal, the ghost of something that burns hot then fades into your clothes. The scent pulled a color into my mind. That brown-gray smoke that sits low over a field and refuses to lift. I could not see anyone. I could not see anything that wasn't stone and wood and flag, but the chapel felt full, the way a room feels when a choir inhales at once. I whispered Raphael, though I knew he wasn't there, because I needed to merge what I was feeling with a shape I could hold. Hold, the voice said again, and this time there were others behind it, not a roar, not a chant. A murmur like surf, syllables worn smooth by repetition. I left. I am not the man the movies make. I backed out of that chapel feeling the dark press on me like an extra shirt 2 sizes too small, and I breathed in hot night as if it were medicine. The courtyard seemed to lean toward me, listening. I almost dropped my keys trying to lock the door, though I knew that if locks could keep the past in its rooms, the world would be a different place. I didn't tell Raphael. I told him I needed fresh air and walked the perimeter twice, then went back to my checklist and tried to root my mind around it. The body remembers what the mind refuses. The body kept glancing over my shoulder. The next night I played a fool's game. I told myself I'd misheard. 1 trick of sound becomes 3 when we're lonely. I rolled the mop bucket toward the chapel and felt the wheels chatter over grout lines like teeth. The moon was on her back and hazed, so the light on the stones felt sickly. I thought I'd feel stronger if I were in motion, and I did. Right until I put the mop into the water and the surface trembled in a way that did not match my fingers. Its ripples lined up clean, one behind another, as if something unseen walked past the bucket and shook it. I went in anyway. And maybe that was the decision that mattered. The chapel held its breath in that same way, and when I laid the mop to the floor, I heard a dozen echoes at once. I set the mop aside. I stood still until the human desire to fill silence with words packed itself down into a tight fist in my chest. The smell came again, not stronger, just surer. And because we are animals with senses we pretend are all mapped and named, my skin recognized what my eyes refused. It wasn't just muskets. There was leather. There was the dry tin smell of canteens. There was the iron of blood, not fresh and not gory. Only the memory of iron left on your hands after you helped someone off the ground. There was a sweetness that made my mouth water and then made me swallow fiercely to keep it from breaking out of me. Because the sweetness was wrong in that place. Candle wax maybe, or liquor, or fear itself, which has a sugar to it if you've tasted it enough times to know. Hold the line, a voice said, closer to me than the night before. Hold. I think I might have whispered yes because I felt my throat work around the word. That was the first time the line moved through me. That is what it felt like. Not hands on my arms, not pressure at my back. Emotion, as if I were a door in a parade that had been marching a long time, paused to pass through my frame. I felt weight on my feet that wasn't mine. I felt a stiffness in my legs like I'd run and run. I tasted breath that had been held too long. And in the hollow between my ribs, something set its flag. When I opened my eyes, I don't know when I closed them, I saw what you might call a trick of light. I call it the beginning of my recruitment. A shimmer gathered at the side aisle. It had the shape of a man the way heat above a road on a hot day has the shape of what it distorts. You could say the empty made a man-shaped hole in itself. And I could see the bench through him. And also I could see his jaw because it clenched in a way that is universal among men who stand and wait while someone reloads nearby. He faced me but did not look at me. His eyes were set on what was behind me, through me, in front of me in a time I could not step into. I saw the ghost of a brim. I saw torn cloth. I saw a thick finger move because it twitched against the stock of a weapon I could not see until a second later, when the edges of it rose like steam out of noon. I nodded without meaning to, and the shimmer inclined his head in the barest echo of my motion, like reflection but not mirror, and then he was gone. Or not gone, only so faint he became the room again. When you're haunted you can go home, but you bring it with you. My apartment on the east side had soft walls that let the neighbors' babies cry through in little strands of sound. When I showered, the water left fog on the cheap mirror that made my face a story someone else might tell about me. That first week after I felt the line move, I started hearing dawn differently. Dawn is not quiet if you have lived near highways or birds. But dawn at 4:30 began to arrive in my bedroom not as sound but as a pressure in my sternum. A hand pressing down once then again. The way a drill sergeant's palm might test your chest to see if your lungs were doing their job. The first Sunday, it came with a report. The crack and rush of a black powder discharge that did not belong to the century pressing its cheek against mine. I sat up so fast I saw stars. The room smelled wrong. Scorched in that way I knew deep now. And then the scent stained itself into the curtains and did not lift even when I opened the window to the noisy alley. I told no one. Who do you tell that the air is remembering around you? Who do you tell that your lungs have joined something older than your breath? Instead I drove. San Antonio is a town of loops and spurs. Highways hug and peel away. At night the concrete cools and holds the day in a breath you can taste like old tea. I drove the loop that rings downtown and watched the lights slide across my windshield, and felt a steadiness in the motion, as if moving forward could keep the line from catching up to me for a little while. I drove past the river in its polite channel, past churches that folded into themselves so nicely it hurt, past the hospital where my father had died in a way that taught me silence can scream. I ended up back at the plaza as if the streets had taken pity on my indecision and guided me. I did not park right away. I circled the block. The iron fence gleamed against the night like a rib cage. I got out and walked to the gate and put my hands on it. The metal felt like a pulse if you pretended. I stared through at the chapel, which in that light looked smaller than it does in daytime, as if the dark were consuming its edges. You might think a believer would pray. I am not a believer in the way the word gets used. My belief is ugly or homemade, a thing built of scraps. I put my forehead on the iron bar and whispered my father's name because saying it had always made me feel steadier. The sound came back to me, bounced off stone, and did not return the way any of my other words came back. It returned lighter. It returned as if somebody had carried it and then set it down softly. A shape moved in the courtyard. Not a person, not a body I could report to Raphael as a trespasser with any clarity. But something moved without weight. A path cleared itself of darkness like a wind had walked down it. It passed to the chapel door and then through it. I followed. I did not unlock the gate because this was not a trespass. This was what I have come to understand as an invitation. The second you step where you do not belong, you know it in the ankle and the knee. Your body throws a net of doubt and says wrong ground. When my shoes crossed those stones, nothing fought me. That was worse in a way. It felt like the place knew my tread now and was adjusting to it. I reached the chapel door. I did not fumble this time. I pushed in, they were waiting. The empty itself had become a tension. I took 3 breaths and each breath returned with a taste, smoke, sweat, lime. My mind flinched like a horse at thunder. I made myself stand and oh how my legs shook. The first step I took forward was not mine. Something behind me put weight in it, and then, like a room full of men stepping into a photograph together, the air filled. You say ghost and people picture bedsheets or the dead looking like themselves in storybook clarity. This wasn't that. This was an occupation. The room was occupied by what time refuses to surrender. I could hear words, some English, some Spanish, all compressed by urgency into a single tongue that mattered more than grammar. Names came without faces. Mother's names, God's name, feet scuffed to find balance. The chitter of ramrods, a cough that should have been fatal after weeks of smoke but somehow wasn't, because the body had made a hard bargain with itself. Not yet. My own voice. without my consent, said, "Hold." An echo of yes poured through me. I felt it strike each rib like a small hammer. The flag behind the altar lifted and dropped as if someone had walked past it. My right hand rose as if to shoulder a weight. When it fell back to my side, the muscle trembled as if I had carried a rifle all day. This is where I should tell you I ran again. I didn't, because fear is not always flight. Fear sometimes knits itself into obedience. I stood there and let the line use me. I understood, not with my mind, but with a part of me that is older and under all the talk, that the only reason a place can hold its dead is if the living agree to help. A bell, the small tin bite of it, not a cathedral's call, rang once in my left ear. Dawn in some other century broke in a way I could feel in my ankles. I saw nothing with my eyes, but with the piece of me that dreams made awake, I saw the courtyard full, the wall line a dirty seam, the sky a color our paints don't remember. I saw men who had made decisions kneel to reload. I saw others stand to fire, and I saw them all become a single verb: hold. I went home at 9 that morning with a new heaviness in my pockets. I think I looked like a man who had bought something he couldn't afford and didn't know how to hide, because my neighbor nodded that wary nod that says, "I won't ask." I slept 2 hours and woke to the sensation of marching in the hallway, which made no sense because my complex has carpet in the halls. You can live with anything a while. The echo of boots became my weather. I worked my nights and did my checks and learned the timing of the murmurs, their crest and slack. The line used me but did not harm me. I started bringing water into the chapel, the old kind in a metal bottle that sweats if you touch it wrong, and I set it near the third pew, as if that could help anyone at all. I wiped the stone around the altar slower, as though I might lift some last pain out of it and hold it with my own hands. I told myself this service had meaning, and that meaning was good. I know better now. Meaning is not always kind. Late July put a heat on the city that tasted like coins left in your mouth. Tourists came in families that looked separate until you saw them in the shade and recognized the faces that belonged together. The day staff told stories I half listened to. One of the docents had a pet name for the most persistent questions. She called them the again and again, as in again and again, someone asks where the bodies are. She said we build plaques because we believe words can carry weight if we nail them to a wall. She said it with care and with a sadness that told me she had watched someone cry in the chapel more than once and had not known what to do with her hands. The dawn muskets began in earnest the first week of August. Not every day, not according to a schedule I could write down, but frequently enough that my body would roll toward the sound in sleep as if I had learned to turn toward it like a lover calling my name. The crack wasn't loud in the way a modern gunshot is loud. Black powder has its own voice. It barks and then sighs, and the echo is faster, more intimate. After the reports, always the smell. After the smell, always the silent count, 1, 2, 3, that falls into you and will not be stopped because you weren't the one who started it. On a Tuesday with a sky that had the color of a bruise, hidden under a sleeve, Raphael found me in the courtyard sitting at the base of the live oak as if the roots had invited me. He asked if I was all right in the way men ask when they need the answer to be yes, because then they won't have to go to that place where help lives. I said I was tired. He laughed and said, "Night watch will do you like that." And I said, "Yes," and the lie sat on my tongue like hot metal. He told me about a janitor from the 70s. He told me the story with the edges shaved off as if it were a workplace legend, but his eyes were careful. "Ellis," he said. Walked off shift, left his keys. Folks said he found something that kept walking after he did. Then he grinned that way some men grin when the dark is closer than is comfortable. "You see anything walks after hours, you call me. I outrank dead people. It's in the handbook." That night, a tour group ran long and left paper cups nested by the trash can. I nested them neater because it calmed my hands. A teenage boy lagged behind, palms in pockets, pretending he wasn't spooked. He looked at the chapel like someone looks at the door of a house where a person they love has just died, meaningful but afraid to ascribe that meaning out loud. He strolled toward the gate casual as noon, and then he stopped just at the boundary where the courtyard meets the street, as if he had walked into fishing line. He turned his head as if someone had called his name in a language he had spoken as a child, and then forgotten. His mouth opened a little. No sound came out. For an instant I saw him as he would be in a photograph 10 years from now. More square in the jaw, eyes more tired, a tattoo he would regret. For an instant, I saw him as a boy holding a wooden toy in a backyard. He blinked. He shook himself. He went through the gate and out into the city's cover of noise. When dusk spilled its burn slowly into the pale, the chapel grew heavier. I finished my list and did not once glance toward the door because I knew the attention there would feel like an invitation to stare back. I made myself a liar 10 times by looking in my periphery instead. The line was in a mood I had come to recognize. This is the closest word I can find. Inspection. The way a sergeant walks a row not to punish but to become certain. At 1:30, Raphael gave me a nod from the visitor center as he lifted his coffee. At 1:45, a girl laughed too loud on the other side of the fence as she passed with someone she loved. At 2, the courtyard wore its usual hush, but truer somehow, like a well-tuned instrument waiting for a bow. "Hold," the voice said, not questioning and not imploring, a reminder. A call to attention. I went in. The chapel was full before I entered. There is a pressure in the head that tells you when a storm approaches, and there is a pressure in the soul that says you are about to do something irrevocable. I carried both like a stone on my tongue. "Hold," I said back without deciding to say it. The stone in my chest became lighter, which is to say, it became a flag. The sound that followed is one I do not describe for effect. It simply was. It was the roll of drums you feel in your teeth. It was the quiet footscuff of 1,000 choices aligning. It was the grip tightening on wood. It was the prayer seam in a man's palm, opening a little wider to make room for one more plea. Then another note rose in the room, the cold whisper a musket barrel makes if it brushes stone. It is like a violin string sigh if the instrument had lost its ability to sing and knew it. The sound slid along the wall and up the arch and became a line of resonance a human voice could ride. Mercer. My name was in that resonance. It did not come from a mouth. It came from the place that now knew me and was testing the weight of me as if I were a new sandbag on an old barricade. "I'm here," I said, and the treachery of that I understood later. Not then. Then it felt like loyalty. The rest happened the way dawn happens, slow in its first second and then too quickly to stop. A crack shuddered the air. The smell arrived. The ghosted weight in my hands jerked as if it had done its duty well. Voices, so many voices, braided into a rope of yes. The flag stirred. A chill climbed the back of my neck like a recruit taking his place at attention in the row. Past the altar, the shadows moved in step. I knew the step without knowing the men. The cadence sank into my blood with that old demand that makes your muscles into a chorus. The line began to pass, not a procession out into the courtyard, but through me the way water moves through a culvert designed for what floods. And as they passed, I learned what they wanted. You think the dead ask to be mourned? Some do. You think the dead ask to be released? Some do. These dead asked to be preserved, not as relics, but as action. They wanted their standing to continue. The word that mattered most to them still mattered. Hold. And holding is not only a stance, it is a task you hand to someone with a living heartbeat after you burn yours out at your post. I said yes before I knew that's what I said. I said yes when I returned the chapel key to its hook. I said yes when I carried the hallway's trash outside and paused under the live oak and felt another dawn line itself up over a century and a half away. I said yes when I sang under my breath the nameless tune I'd caught from the air, a cadence of marching that had no melody and did not require one. The next day, a field trip of children spilled like marbles on tile in the visitor center, and a boy with a cowlick asked his teacher if they still keep muskets here that work. The teacher gave a gentle answer about history and safe displays. The docent added something polished and true about heritage. The boy's eyes slid past them and landed on me. He stared for a second too long, and his forehead furrowed, and then he was tugged away by the current of his class and forgot me. I didn't forget him. I began to watch the faces of the ones who lagged, the ones whose ears cocked a little toward the chapel like dogs listening to thunder at a distance. They were not many. but they were exactly enough. On a pale dawn in September, that felt as if summer had finally loosened its fist. The first proof came. I slept past my alarm, which I never do, and woke in that strange way where you're awake first in your bones and last in your eyes. The sound of the hallway's carpet swallowed a cadence that didn't need noise to be loud. The room smelled like powder again. The knot quiet in my chest tapped me twice. At the exact moment my phone said 6:19, a single distant report sounded, followed by another like a call and answer. I stood on my bare feet and felt the floor answer in its timbers. My breath steamed, a little, which made no sense because the apartment was warm. I knew the sensation. It is what happens when you stand outside a door and the room on the other side holds air from another season. That was the morning a tourist on the edge of the plaza swore he saw men in old uniforms walk the chapel's shadow before the grounds opened. He posted a video that showed nothing when you looked at it, not with your eyes. It showed shadow and the faint warp of a lens catching sun and wishful thinking. But if you turned the sound all the way up and played it alone, the way I did, you heard the cadence. You heard a voice that had no modern throat say not hello and not goodbye, but something else. Guard. 2 weeks later, just at dawn, when the hotel windows woke before the bodies inside them did, a woman opening the cafe on Houston Street heard a volley of cracks roll across the plaza. She said later she smelled something like fireworks, but older and darker. She went home and told her husband, who said it had been a truck backfiring, and she said no, it was the other kind of back. The back that happens when something returns that never left. And I went to work, and I stood in the chapel, and I felt the line arrange itself around me the way geese line up without a word. There's a rightness to marching that terrifies me even now. It gives you a place. It takes every other place away. I thought I understood my part. I did not yet know about the conscription. The boy with the cowlick came back in October with his father. He had made a project at school and he wanted to see something for himself, a name on a plaque maybe, or a corner of stone with a scar in it he could press to paper with a pencil and bring home. They walked the courtyard while the sun knuckled down through cloud. They lingered by the chapel steps. The father put a hand on the boy's shoulder and laughed softly at something his son said. The boy went quiet. The father stepped toward the gate to take a call. The boy's eyes fixed on the door. I felt the air change the way you feel a dog's attention rivet to a sound you can't hear. I was sweeping very deliberately, nothing at all. I looked at the boy and saw a stillness in his face that did not belong to kids who poke at ants with sticks and forget their questions halfway through asking them. He lifted his hand. He did not touch the door. He hovered there, fingers spread as if measuring a distance. The door opened a fraction as if the building had sighed. The boy's hand dropped. He looked at me. His face asked a question he did not have words for. I found myself shaking my head. Not no, not yes. Only a human thing. Wait. He waited. His father slid the phone into his pocket and folded himself back into the morning. The moment tipped and then went back into balance. They left. The boy looked back one last time. The chapel watched him go like a window watches rain. The dawn after that, the muskets spoke again. The city began to tell itself stories. If you live here, you know how we do it. We leave the mall with its cold air pouring out and step into heat like a mother's hand. We eat tacos on the curb. We tell each other why it is we feel a thing and make it funny, because if it's funny, it isn't frightening. Groundskeepers heard things, said little. One of the morning guides claimed she saw footprints near the chapel even on dry days, the kind a heavy boot makes when the sole has a flat worn spot. A security cam glitched at 6:20 every third dawn. That's what the software called it, a glitch. I think sometimes about the word haunting. It implies harm. It implies that the past hunts you down to take what you have. But what was happening in that place under my hands was something else. A garrison, a standing order, a duty that does not tie itself to time. The blood-soaked soil never cooled after 1836. It simply learned new ways to ask for what it needs. I made the mistake that made me part of its supply chain. Night fog collected, once in November, rare and silvery, the kind that makes streetlights into floating coins. It curled low in the courtyard, and the chapel seemed to rise out of it as if the fog had been poured like a foundation, and the building had been laid on it. I was alone in the main space, and had set my mop against the fourth pew. The room was full the way it had learned to be when the hour took hold of it. Men moved in me and through me, not all at once, in shifts. The word beat in my chest like a heart I owed someone. The door at the back, the smaller one rarely used, made its little wood sound. A person stood there, not smoke, not shimmer. A person, a janitor like me, which is to say a man with a bucket and a beard he cut himself and a posture you learn when your work is under people's feet. He stared at me in the low light, and I knew his name because the line said it inside me like it was reading a roster: Ellis. He was not the man from the 70s you'd pass on the street now. He was the age he'd been when he left his keys on the hook. His eyes took my measure. He lifted his chin once, the way a man does when he sees someone wearing his old jacket. He set his bucket down. He did not speak. He walked past me and through me into the altar rail, and when he stood there, the room made a little adjustment, the way bodies make space on a bench for one more. He looked at the flag and then at me. He touched his forehead with 2 fingers in a gesture that carried too many meanings to decode. Respect. Farewell. Relief, maybe. Then he stepped backward as if walking out of a photograph. The door at the back sighed again. The fog at the threshold stirred. He was gone, and I did not chase. I took my place. The line had another name to file under. Mine. I will tell you the end, but I need you to feel how the year curved toward it. Winter presses here not with cold, but with a different light. Shadows come sooner. The white of the chapel's facade flattens and then deepens, and the tourists wear jackets that do not close. The city smells of cinnamon and exhaust, and the river's cleaned edges. People speak a little softer as the holidays put their hand on their mouths. That softness became an echo in our little garrison. The dawn muskets came regular as vows. The scent came. The boot rhythm laid itself across the courtyard like a fine, taut thread and thrummed with invisible fingers. Sometimes there were more. I felt them as a mass, as a mood, as the way a choir's sound grows thicker when 6 more men stand up on the back row. Sometimes there were fewer, and those mornings had a loneliness to them like you get the day after a funeral, when everyone who would have stayed has gone home. The line always formed. The word always came. Hold. Guard. Stand. And underneath that a new word grew. A word nobody said aloud because you don't speak it if you serve. You live it. Recruit. The Alamo is not just a building that remembers. It is a machine that takes attention as fuel and turns it into standing. The tours feed it, the plaques feed it, the school children feed it with their questions and their little gasps that say, "Tell me if this matters." The janitors feed it because we give the place our hands, and if a place gets your hands, it will find a way to get your heart. I became a runner for that machine. I did not mean to, and I cannot absolve myself by saying I did not mean to, because intention is not the currency that pays the bill. I started to notice them in the crowd. Not the ones who looked for ghosts, because ghosts are decorative if you don't need them. The ones who felt the change in air the way a bird feels pressure drops. The ones whose faces seemed to hear a rhythm the others did not. I began to step along their path as they drifted and find myself at the place where they paused. I began to put my hand on the chapel door just as theirs lifted and not open it, and still have them feel as if something had opened. I began to tell them with my eyes what the line wanted them to know, that the wall you are leaning against will ask for you, and you do not have to say yes today, but you will. When the boy with the cowlick came back the 3rd time, he came alone. It was a cool morning that asked for a jacket. He had on a hoodie instead, the kind with a team name on it that means less to you now than it will when your knees begin to complain. He flew in that way teenagers do when their bodies have grown too fast for them to carry with grace. He walked without walking like he had been drawn. He went to the chapel and stood without looking around the way tourists do. He knew what he was doing, even if the knowledge had not yet become a sentence. I stood at my usual station just inside. Where the shadow of the arch makes a stripe along the floor no mop can erase. He stepped across the threshold. The room made its change. The weight in the air shifted the way a bar shifts when someone else sets a drink down. The boy's breath went out of him. He whispered something that might have been a name or might have been the sound your mouth makes when it believes and hates that it believes. "Hold," I said, and that was the moment I chose for him. I am not proud of it. I am telling you because confession is a kind of cleaning and I have always been good at that part. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. Not tears exactly. The way eyes wet when a cold wind drives into them and the body makes its mild complaint. He nodded. That was all. A barest thing. But a nod in a chapel carries more weight than a man should be allowed to lift. Dawn cracked outside. In the old way, the reports came. The smell draped everything. I felt him straighten the way a soldier straightens, not because he wants to be tall, but because he must hold something up. The flag stirred, the line moved. I wish I could say I took his arm and led him back out into the day. I wish I could say I told him to go find a baseball or a river or a kiss. I put my hand at the small of his back and guided him 2 steps forward. I saw his shoulders settle. The word recruit grew into its full size in the air and set itself behind his teeth. He left with the morning crowd. He looked on the far side of the gate like every other kid who has stood in front of something that will outlive him, and tried to understand what that feels like. He walked toward Houston Street. The city made its normal noise as if nothing had changed. The next dawn, the volley woke me before the sound. The pressure in my lungs knit itself into an order and delivered itself to my feet. I stood and dressed without looking at what my hands did. I drove to the plaza on roads the traffic had not yet claimed. The light was gray and uncertain. A faint mist lay over the street like spun sugar that makes your tongue itch. I held my badge up to the reader with a hand that was not shaking. Inside, the courtyard bent itself toward the chapel as if drawn by a magnet. The door was open. The space inside had its full company. At the front near the rail was the boy. Not a shimmer, a person. He stood the way they stand. He did not see me and he did not need to. The line saw me. The line arranged itself around him. The room made a place the way a river makes a new channel when it runs too high for the old one to hold. The smell was strong. The flag said yes, yes, yes with its cloth throat. Outside, beyond the open door, the city paused. This is the part I cannot rationalize or soften. This is the part that made the confession lodge under my tongue so long I almost choked on it. A group of early joggers slowed near the gate, and one of them, the father from October, the boy's father, looked in. He had his earbuds in. He was a man who runs early because the day owns him after 8 and will not let him go. He looked in and saw nothing, I think, because his face did not do the thing a face does when it sees something its blood will remember. He tilted his head and smiled the way you smile at a place that means something to you, even if you cannot say what. And then he staggered. He did not fall. He flinched like a man who has heard a door slam in a room he thought was empty. He put his hand to his chest. He shook it off and lifted his eyes again with a little embarrassed shake of his head. Because embarrassment will save you from truth for a second or two if you're lucky. The other joggers said something ordinary. They moved on. I heard, faint as grief, a breath that did not belong to anyone with a living lung. I understood then, the way a stone understands pressure and cracks along a fault line it always possessed, that the line had learned a new trick. It could lay its dawn into a living body elsewhere and take just enough of something, just enough that the person would think it was a stitch or a skipped beat, or the cost of being human. It could make an echo cost someone who would never know the ledger had their name. I went into the chapel. The boy's face held a calm that undid me. Not joy and not peace and not sleep. Duty. He looked older in that duty and younger both. The way the faces of the dead in old photographs do when you finally stop looking at their uniforms and see their mouths. Guard, I said, and he did. You might ask me why I didn't stop. You might ask where my line is and why. Because this is the part the building never teaches the tours. Some things grow out of wounds the way trees grow out of rivers. They lean toward the cut because the cut provides. A garrison is a garden too, and it needs tending. We think we are preserving history when we brush the dust off and hang it straight, but sometimes we are feeding it so that it can continue eating. You will hear the muskets if you live here long enough. Some dawn the sound will reach you in a waiting room or a kitchen or on an early drive to a job you're not sure you should keep. When you hear it, you will smell a sweetness that is not sugar and not smoke, but a private thing. The scent of your own fear dressed up like tradition. Something will press your chest with 2 fingers. That's them checking your fit. If you go down to the plaza to look for a thing to blame, you will not find it. You will only find people doing their jobs. A janitor with a mop. A guard with his coffee. A docent polishing a speech for the 1000th time. And behind them, in them, around them, a line. They still stand guard. They haven't surrendered because the ground doesn't let them. The soil never cooled. It only learned stamina. The city gives it shade and food and attention. The living give it breath. Men like me give it hands. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was hired to clean floors and empty bins and make glass shine, and I did. I also opened a door with my body. I told a boy to stand where the river runs hardest. The line took him like water takes the bank at the bend. His father will jog past the plaza many mornings and feel a stitch and decide he needs a new pair of shoes. The tourist will stand and pose and feel the damp in the stone and call it humidity. The flag will move without air. The sound will come at dawn. Somewhere, a kid with a cowlick will smell the powder in his sleep and wake with his heart beating out a rhythm he will think is his. If you are watching this because you felt the pressure and thought it was nothing, I am telling you it is something. I am telling you the way to avoid it is to stay away at dawn, to keep your eyes on the river's bright curve, to put your palms in your pockets when your hand rises toward the door like it wants to measure a distance. I am telling you this because I have learned what the line does with a man who believes he is only doing his job. When I leave the chapel each night, the door eases closed behind me like a breath leaving a body. And I make a mistake I know is one every time. I pause on the threshold and listen. I listen because duty is a habit, because habit is a prayer, because prayers do not require a God so much as they require a listener. Some nights I hear nothing and tell myself it is done. Most nights, I hear the echo of boots in the courtyard and know it is not tourists and know it is not the past. Not exactly, but the present practicing the shape it will take tomorrow. I hear the soft kiss of metal on stone, the long inhale of men who have become order more than memory. And sometimes now in that hush where my name used to be, the room says a different one. It tries out yours. My name is Caleb Mercer and I'm from Denton, Texas. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. It wasn't just a night, really. It was a kind of crossroad you step past without knowing, like the seam where asphalt turns to gravel. The sound changes under your tires, and somewhere in the switch you leave behind whatever made you yourself. Denton is full of those seams. Noise and quiet, lights and fields, the student bars along Fry Street, the back roads ribbed with caliche stretching toward Lake Ray Roberts, the wind pressing heat against your clothes so you feel wrapped in a damp quilt. And out there past the subdivisions growing like algae on the creek beds, there's the old truss bridge where kids park and pretend at bravery because the bones of the county are exposed there. Steel, oak, and rumor. The rumor said if you stood on that black lattice of beams with the creek whispering below and said a certain name 3 times, he might come, and if he came, he might ask your name back. Some people say he was a man once, OT something I never remember for sure, who kept goats and got strung up for nothing he did. That's one story. Others say there never was a man at all. The county just needed a shape for its meanness. And so it made one with horns and burned him into the underside of the bridge with whispered breath. I'll tell you what I know. Names are doors, some open, some never shut. It was late September. The heat had sloped off, but the ground was still giving it back like a dog breathing through its teeth. We'd spent the evening at a little house off Scripture, playing a video game Jace swore was the second coming of horror. When the power stuttered, the way it does sometimes near campus, we stood out on the sidewalk under that sodium orange light and felt stupid and young. Somebody said we should drive. Somebody else said the bridge. The bridge is the word you bring out when you want to be different by doing the same thing as everyone else. There were 5 of us. Me, my girlfriend Mara, my neighbor Olivia, who smelled like sage lotion and wore boots with little stars punched in the leather. Jace, loud and tender, the kind of guy who could make you laugh while you were crying. And Felix, who everyone called Fee, shy and sharp and always a half-second behind like he was buffering. We took my car. The AC ticked like a cricket. I-35 hummed. the stars low and hazy with town glow and the thin cough of light from Denton's courthouse. We turned off near Mayhill and wound back roads where the street signs lean into the ditch and feral sunflowers tatter the fences. The land out there is almost too flat. A person begins to think they're not so much driving as rotating in place, and the fields are sliding around you like scenery painted on a barrel. We passed a cemetery whose stones hunched in the earth like bad teeth. Jace pressed his face to the window and made ghost noises. Mara swatted his shoulder and told him to cut it out. Olivia laughed, but it caught in her throat like a seed hull. V kept checking the rear view. I asked him what he was looking for. Nothing, he said. I just felt like something was counting our turns. At the bridge, we cut the engine and the creek's voice rose, insects thrumming like current. The steel truss looked blacker than the night around it, just a web stuck between the trees. No moon. The woods on each side chattered inside. You could smell wet iron, sap, and something else. Pennies pressed hard against your tongue or a slaughterhouse miles off. There were old carvings on the guardrails, knife-sliced letters and dates. People in Denton loved to prove they were alive by making something else a little more dead. The sign down the hill says the official name, but everyone knows it by the other one. Locals say if you stand in the middle and say it 3 times, he comes. If you hear hooves, don't run, because you won't go anywhere except deeper into what's already in motion. If you see a face in the fog, don't ask whose. If he asks your name, it's already too late. We didn't intend to say anything. We were there to scare ourselves a bit, take the photos, pretend it's summoning. But when you stand in a place built to carry weight, you want to give it something to carry. We walked to the center. Fee lagged, fingers skimming the lattice as if feeling for a pulse. You can smell it, Olivia whispered. Like a storm, but the dry side of a storm. Jace went to the railing and dropped a pebble into the creek. Plink. Then silence folding over it. I dare you, he said without any preamble. 3 times, Mara shook her head. Nope. Her hair was braided down her back and looked like a rope you could climb or hang from. I hated myself for thinking both at once. Not funny, she added. Come on. Jace was performing because he always performs when the world feels too large. We'll say it together. Then we'll go get Whataburger and pretend we weren't cowards. There's a type of night where sound doesn't travel right. Jokes go flat or travel like thrown knives. That night had that shape. A motor far off droned and cut. A dog barked and the bark seemed to come from under the bridge, not from any house. In the dark, graffiti glowed dull and oily. A pentagram, a date, a crude heart, the word mercy over and over. It made me tongue my own name against my teeth like a loose tooth, Caleb. The second syllable's heavier. It lands, I'm not... Fee started, then stopped. His eyes were bigger than the little light the sky gave us. I don't like names. I know that sounds dumb, just we should go. Please? Hey, I told him. I pressed his shoulder. It's an instinct, comfort by weight. We'll do it dumb and quick. We'll do it wrong. The rules are all made up anyway. I wish now we had simply walked back to the car and left. If wishes were roads. Ready, Jay said. He raised his hands like he was quieting a crowd. On 3 count of 3, not 3 then go 3, okay? 1, 2, and then we said it. The first time it came out as a joke. The second time it came out like a test you hadn't studied for. The third time it didn't come out at all. The night took it like a fish takes a fly, gone, no ripple. After, there was a little wind, not enough to move the scrub oak leaves, just enough to turn the feel of the air, so when it went into you, it was colder on the way out. We did it, Olivia whispered. Her boot heel made a clicking sound on the deck and I hated that sound instantly. Nothing. See? Jace spread his arms. Now he froze, his head turned. Do you hear that? We all heard it, slow and light as if someone were coming down the steel in bare feet that weren't feet. A hollow tapping, then a drag, then the tap again. You tell yourself it's just the metal cooling. It wasn't. It came from above us, among the beams that crisscrossed the dark like scars. The smell of pennies grew. Fee squeezed my wrist so hard the bones ground. Don't look up, he said. And without meaning to, we all looked up. Fog came through the trees like a thing remembering how to walk, gathering on the creek until the water lost its surface. The lattice overhead made squares of a gray deeper than the sky. In that gray there was a notch of darker gray like a face where a face shouldn't be. Wrong in its distances, eyes too far apart, mouth too low, and if you try now to tell me it was a trick of shadow, I will nod and agree. We saw shadow. The shadow saw back. It felt like the steel under us lifted only a hair, like the bridge took a breath. "Say your names," said a voice that wasn't sound. It was the same sensation as when someone speaks in a dream, and you wake with their words drying inside your mouth. And then I did a thing as small as stepping off a curb. I said mine. "Caleb Mercer." The syllables felt like seeds someone dropped into a jar. Mara clamped a hand over her lips. Jace chuckled and made of it a flourish. "Jace Alvarez," he said. "Hi." He always says hi to strangers. "Olivia Brooks," Olivia whispered. She tried to hide the whisper in her hair. Hair isn't very good at hiding anything. Fee didn't speak. He drew himself in, pressing his tongue to the roof of his mouth the way you do to stop a sneeze. His eyes begged us not to look at him. We looked anyway. Sometimes love is a kind of betrayal in slow motion. The tapping overhead moved. A bolt quivered and dropped rust that lifted tiny coughs of dust when it hit the boards. "Name," said that not sound. Fee shook his head. He was such a slight thing. Always smaller than you remembered even standing right there. "No," he said like it hurt him. "No name." "I keep it." He gripped the railing and dug his nails into the flaking paint until black half-moons lodged under them. I wanted to praise him for his stubbornness. I didn't. I wanted out. The fog got thicker, swaddling our knees, our thighs. Jace took one step toward the car and the metal sang under him like a struck bar. Olivia made a soft noise, the kind you make when you stub your toe. Shame and pain mixed. "We should go," Mara said, voice tight enough to snap. "Say it," said the dark. "Say your name." Fee didn't. He took one look at me, and in that look I saw 1,000 afternoons. A sunburnt kid throwing a tennis ball against a garage door. A boy hiding in the library stacks. A friend leaving the party early because the music was too bright. He shook his head once. "No." Then the fog fattened, the way fog does near water when the conditions are right, and in the space of a breath I couldn't see their outlines. I grabbed for Mara and caught fabric. The thing above moved. The sound went away entirely. Not even the bug spoke. There's a silence that pushes on your eardrums like you're deep underwater. That silence came. From the fog, someone laughed breathless and panicked. That was Jace, and someone else said, "Fee?" That was me. I said it without thinking. Not his full name. Just the name we called him by, the small, easy version. The nickname that erases edges. It's what we do when we love someone. We trim their name to fit in our mouths. "Fee," I called again. And something in the fog opened to make a space for that syllable. A slot, a notch, a cuff. Names or doors. I had opened one for him from the wrong side. He made a sound then. A hurt animal sound that wasn't pain so much as shock at having a thing torn loose. I saw a darker shape in the gray and stepped toward it, and my hand found air where a body had been. The steel flexed. The fog rolled backward like a wave sucked away from a beach. And then we were four, Jace swore. He swore the way a child does, trying the word on to see if it fits. Mara said Fee's name without the nickname. The full name like an attempt to pull him back by it. Olivia crouched and felt along the boards for something, anything. A dropped phone, a scuffed mark. There was nothing except an oval of damp where a foot had been, and even that dried faster than it could mean anything. We ran to the car. I reversed too fast and sprayed gravel. My hands shook on the wheel. I could not stop saying the names of the people in the car like rosary beads. Mara, Olivia, Jace. I did not say Fees. I saw it written in the air ahead of us, though as if the headlights were carving it into the fog with a knife. When we turned onto the blacktop, the world snapped back into its shape with a little elastic sting. Distant houses. A light in a barn. The erratic bounce of a rabbit's tail taking cover in the ditch. My body kept waiting to feel another presence in the back seat, and my body kept not feeling it. That dissonance is what breaks a person, not the thing itself that happened or didn't happen. At Whataburger on University, the fryer oil sweetened the air, and a kid with acne asked for our order and blinked at us when we said nothing. We must have looked like we'd been rolled in flour. The grease smell made me swallow hard. It tasted like pennies again, like I'd bit my tongue without knowing. "Maybe he walked off," Jace said with a little horrible laugh, like he was messing with us. "Right, Fee? He'll text in a minute and call me a drama queen." We watched each other's phones. No texts came. I typed, deleted. My hand wrote out the first 3 letters of his name and then wouldn't go on. Like my thumb had more sense than my brain. The cashier said he needed us to move to the side, and we didn't until he said it twice. We stepped away as if our feet were stuck with glue. We leaned against the ketchup bar. The red bubbled slowly from the dispensers like a heart working too hard. Mara vomited neat as a cat into a napkin and wrapped it like a present and put it in the trash. She went to the bathroom and returned with her braid unspooled like she'd fought with it, eyes red. Olivia stared at her fries until they cooled to something like chalk. Jace insisted on buying a meal for Fee and setting it on the table. We sat and didn't eat. A family with a booster seat looked at us and then looked away and then looked at us again. We were either a warning or a joke. By morning, when nothing had changed, we told a version of the truth. The cops at first seemed tired and then interested. They asked if we'd been drinking. No. Drugs? No. Did Fee have any reason to run away? Don't say from what, I told myself, but the words slipped anyway. From what? I asked, and the cop wrote something down and looked at me too long. The search at the bridge felt like a party where someone's child is missing. People showed up because the day was bright and they were generous, and because they wanted to see if the thin spot in the world where things slip through would show itself. They brought coolers and hand sanitizer and wore neon vests. A guy from church led a prayer. Mara said nothing and kept her face turned toward the lattice as if it were a television, playing the only thing that mattered. Olivia organized the sign-in clipboards with such meticulous care, you'd have thought the paper could catch him. No sign. The creek gave up nothing. The dogs nosed and whined and then sat, uninterested, like we were asking them to find a word that had never been spoken aloud. That should be the end of the story. It's the we don't know ending that keeps everyone safe. But there's something you need to understand about Denton, about Texas, about any place where flatness offers no place to hide. There's a price to be paid for making a story into a dare. We had paid in advance without knowing. At night, I slept and didn't sleep. There's a way of half-dozing where your mind walks around your house and opens the closets and sets the shoes side by side and stares at them until morning. I kept seeing the way fog can hold shape. In dreams, I would get out of bed and go into the hall and find footprints there damp like a dog had gone through sprinklers. Goat hooves? We joked once. We joked wrong. They weren't cloven, not exactly. More like fingers printed in lines. I would follow them to the front door and the door would be open a hair, the chain still set. The space between the door and the jamb would be big enough to let a breath inside. And from there I would hear the creak. Though the creek was miles away, I started smelling that penny smell in my car. It would show up at odd corners of the day, like the scent of a person who'd sat next to you on a bus and left their heat behind on the vinyl. It came in elevators and bathrooms, in the stairwell of the theater building, in the hall outside the advisor's offices. Sometimes I'd turn and expect to see Fee, always slightly behind, buffering. I never did. I started avoiding places where my name was called, like roll in class, like the counter at a coffee shop. I told them my name was M. They wrote it M and looked at me like it was a joke. And because it sounded like a joke, I started to say it like one. M, haha. Stop, Mara said finally one night, her hands shaking not with anger but with some more delicate tremor made from fear and fatigue. You have to stop pretending that if we teach the air how to say our names different, it'll unlearn the right way. We taught it wrong once, I said. We taught it with Fee, we taught it the short version, maybe. Maybe it can't find him if we stop using it. You can't unring a bell, she said. You can't unsay a name once it's said. I noticed the flyers, not just Fee's, though those multiplied with the rain until their fibers softened and splayed and they came to look like something alive had been drowned in them. Other flyers appeared, old ones half scraped from poles, edges ragged, missing from other years, other bridges, other counties. The same eyes cut from faces by a copier. The same words near the bottom, last seen 510, brown hair, scar on chin, answer to. Answer to. There it was again. Some people answered to names that were never theirs at all. And maybe something else answers to answer to. Names are doors, but they are also leashes. 2 weeks after, Jace came to my apartment with his hoodie pulled up and his bravado turned down. He stood in my doorway and I knew. Before a person states the thing, his shoulders had emptied in a new way. He didn't speak and I could hear the creak in his silence. What did you do? I asked, though I knew. He didn't answer immediately. He stared at my hands. I said it again, he whispered. At the bridge, to see if it works like a light switch. If you flip it twice, did he come? I asked, and my lips stuck to my gums, dried there. I heard the sound. He swallowed like it had burrs, and a shape, and it wanted me to say my name again, like it had forgotten the first time and needed to hear it fresh. What did you say? I said my mother's name. he said quickly, the confession of a child. Not the full one. The one we called her by that no one else used. His breath shuddered, and when I turned around to run, some part of the fog came with me, like it was holding the hem of my shirt and I had to leave it to get free. And when I got home, my phone had a missed call from her. She lives in San Antonio. She hasn't called me in 3 months. But there it was. Missed call. I didn't call back. And then the number disappeared. You gave it her name, I said, and he folded in on himself. I thought, Jace began, and then he didn't. What could he have thought? That a name without the person is safe. That a nickname is not a real name. That love makes us immune. Pick one illusion. They all break the same. Jace was the next to go. Not like Fee, no fog, no bridge. He disappeared between English comp and a cigarette outside. The kind of time that doesn't exist if you're not paying for it. He was there and then he wasn't. And then a week later a stray goat turned up behind the apartments on Bernard. And when the landlord called animal control, they said there were more sightings across town. And my heart sent a crack through itself and set like that. Not because I thought Jace had become anything. I'm not a child. But because the world had started talking to us in a crooked grammar, and I didn't know the rules anymore. Olivia left for her parents without telling anyone. She texted me a picture from the road of a cloud leaning over the highway like a giant had pressed its thumb into the sky. Don't call my name out loud, she wrote. Write it. If you must. But don't say it. Not even to yourself. I did as she asked, and still, a month later, her mother's Facebook post asked for prayers and shared the missing person graphic we all expect will be for someone else. Mara stayed. We stayed. We moved around each other carefully. We didn't say each other's names like they were fine glass. We became connoisseurs of pronouns. We invented a language of touches to say what we didn't dare speak. Sometimes at night the bed would dip as if someone sat at the edge and then rose. Sometimes the mirror fogged around letters we couldn't read. Once the smoke alarm chirped 3 times and went dead. Battery fresh. You didn't tell me everything, she said one evening when the cicadas burned the edges of our hearing and the sky was a bruise. On the bridge. That night, after we said it, we never said the name of the thing. That at least we learned. You told it your name first. I know, I said. The shame had fermented. It was vinegar now. I should have held it back. You did worse than that, she said, and her eyes were a bright, exhausted thing. You gave it the way we say Fee's name. You gave it the lockpick. You were trying to call him and you called. Her voice broke. You let the world know what to call him by to get him to turn his head. I know, I said again. Knowing is a cruel currency. We broke up without breaking. She just started walking more slowly toward my place and then stopped walking at all. I started to dream that I was on the bridge. And at the center of the lattice there was a patch of darkness darker than darkness, like a missing color. In the dream, the darkness said my name and I reached up without meaning to, as you do when someone says your name with the exact inflection your mother used when you were 4. I woke with the taste of rust and wet leaves. I'll be honest about this part because truth is the only coin I have left. A year later I went back. Not to undo anything. You can't, not to apologize. Apologies are bread tossed to a river. Maybe the fish eat it, maybe they float away. I went back because something in me had bent around that bridge and never straightened. And a person can only be bent so far before they conform to the thing that bent them or break. It was winter this time. North Texas doesn't get much of a winter, but this year we got the edge of one like a blade laid against the throat to show it could cut if it wanted. The trees were peeled down to their elbow-smooth branches. The creek was a black ribbon. The sky was so clear it looked fragile. I stood at the center. I held my hands out at my sides. I said nothing. For a long time, nothing answered. Then a crow called once and fell silent. Then from under the far bank, a low blowing as if a big animal had exhaled into a cupped hand. The steel lifted a hair, not enough to see, just enough that my knees said, we are on a breathing thing. The smell of pennies came so clean and thin it might have been a note struck on glass. Say it, said the dark that isn't sound. I didn't. Names are doors and some doors open only one way. But I realized something. Then I should have realized at the beginning. The dare goes one way. The name goes the other. But the bargain, oh, the bargain goes wherever it wants. We had paid a price and nothing we did would unbalance it. But there was a different currency I hadn't tried. Take mine, I whispered. Not my name, but what I meant was, take me. But I didn't say my name. I couldn't give it the key. I stood there in the middle of that black geometry and offered without the words that would make the offer binding. It was cowardice dressed as courage. I know that. I know it down to the bottom of my bones. The fog didn't come. The hooves didn't click. No shape knit itself from the lattice. After a while, my teeth began to hurt from the cold, and I walked back to the car and drove home. Feeling both rescued and rejected. Since then, years have stacked like folding chairs in the back of a VFW hall. The same room, different arrangements. Denton grew as it does into its own repetitions. New coffee shops, new traffic on 380, more cranes on the horizon than crows, the courthouse keeping its lace of lights every December. Students came and went. I kept working at the hardware store, then managing it, then pretending I minded being asked about screws and paint swatches more than I did. I learned a lot about the names for small things. There are 27 varieties of wall anchor that are functionally identical and yet not. Names. The town called itself a music town, a food town, a college town, a small town in the city's shadow. All these are true and not, depending on which side of the bridge you stand. Sometimes I see someone at the edge of a crowd, a boy with Fee's posture, a girl with Olivia's boots, a man laughing with Jace's lopsided mouth. I follow and lose them and tell myself it's okay to look and not to find. Sometimes the creak sounds in the traffic and I turn without knowing why. Sometimes in my apartment, the front door opens a hair against the chain and a winter breath comes in and says my name the way a mother would, and I reach without meaning to. That's when I hold my tongue between my teeth so hard I taste pennies. Because the name wants out, and if it gets out 3 times, who knows the door it opens. 3 is a hinge. 3 is, and so on. I said at the start that you need to hear this. I mean it, I'm not telling you so you'll go. The opposite. I'm telling you because there are places where the world is thinner, not because something from the other side yanked at it, but because we rubbed against it so long we wore the spot down. We made a little window and then blamed whatever looked in. The price of a name is not paid by the one who gives it. Not entirely.
It's paid by the one it fits best. Well, which one does it fit?
The long name given at birth. The short one we use when we're kind. The secret one we never say because it isn't a word at all, but the pressure of a hand. The tilt of a cheek. The breath between a laugh and the next word. When I close my eyes, I can see the lattice overhead and the fog knitting and unknitting itself like a sweater pulled out and refashioned. I can feel the slight lift as the metal breathes. I can smell iron and sap and rust and something sweetly animal. I can hear the soft tap, drag, tap. These are the senses of a place that isn't a place so much as a habit the land has. It makes a person think maybe a name is the land's way of rubbing us down. 2, until we shine and then vanish. If I have one piece of advice, it's this. Don't say the name of a thing you don't understand just to find out if it hears you. Don't trim the names of people you love until they're small enough to fall through a crack in a bridge. Don't take the dare the town hands you as if it were a test of your backbone. Some tests are only doors slicked with oil. Your hand slides, the latch turns, and then what's waiting isn't punishment or reward but simply recognition. Oh, there you are, it says. I knew you when you were a longer name. The other night, someone sent me a clip. Kids on the bridge. A foggy evening. Their voices granular with fear and bravado. It looked like it was filmed on a phone by a kid wearing a sweatshirt with the name of the high school I once drove past and never noticed. Say it, one of them hissed, and my whole body went cold because the pattern never ends. It only rephrases. The camera turned and for a second it caught the plaque with the official name, the one with the letters sandblasted by time. Then it swung back and settled on a boy whose mouth was opening to make the first syllable. I could see his tongue shaping it like it had already practiced in secret alone. As if the name had been waiting in his mouth like a pill he wasn't supposed to take. I closed the video. I didn't finish it. You don't have to eat a thing to know its taste. That same night, I heard the tapping over my bed again, just once, tap, drag, tap, and the smell came clean like a struck note. I lay very still. I didn't speak. The bed dipped at the foot. Weight that wasn't a person because people shift. This weight didn't, it just was. Then softly, like breath fogging a mirror, my name drifted into the room. Not from the ceiling. From the phone on the nightstand. The screen lit with a notification from an unknown number. 3 letters. My name, the long one. Then the short. Then the one no one else ever uses. The one my grandmother called me when we were alone shelling peas and she told me not to tell my parents that she let me sip her beer. All 3 in a row like a door opening on oiled hinges. I didn't answer. I put the phone in the drawer and lay there and listened to the air practice being still. A long time later, my eyes closed. In the half-dream that followed, the bridge rose in front of me not as steel but as language. Black letters crossing and recrossing, trusses built of names, Fee Fee Fee, Jace JJ, Liv Mara, the towns called names, the creeks. Fine, and I understood that the bridge is only the place where the county's story says the quiet part out loud. It can happen anywhere the ground remembers a rumor. A school hallway after hours, the aisles of a hardware store at close. Metal breathing in the heat, pegboard punched with emptiness, the lip of your bed. You are thinking now that I've told you too much while telling you nothing you can use. That's probably true. Horror isn't a lesson, it's a shelf you keep bumping into in the dark. I can give you this, though. If you ever find yourself somewhere quiet and you feel the world lift under you as if helping you take a step you didn't mean to take, hold whatever names you love in your teeth. Don't bite down. Don't let go. Wait. The bridge will breathe, and if you do not, the moment will pass and the boards will fall still and the creek will go on with its tiny, ridiculous miracles. Fish nibbling foam, a leaf spinning like a coin, and morning will come and you will still be yourself. A little rubbed thinner maybe, but here. And if you are watching this because you were thinking about going out there, don't. Don't give the night the satisfaction of making you into a dare. Don't practice the syllables in your mouth. Don't joke that you're too smart to believe. There's a thing at the dark heart of Denton County that doesn't care what you believe, only what you will trade without knowing you've traded it. I will end here. I won't say the name again. I've already paid too much and in the wrong currency. But I will tell you the truth one last time. A name is a door, and every door is also a debt. We gave a name to the dark, and the dark learned how to call us back. If you hear it say your name the way your mother would, soft and sure and full of you, don't answer. Not once, not twice, and certainly not 3 times. My name is Evan Mireless, and I'm from New Braunfels. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. It started with a map pinned to the corkboard in my little apartment off the I-35 frontage road. A map splotched with dots from stories I'd covered that year. Floods along the Guadalupe, a missing hunter near Canyon Lake, a roadside memorial on Highway 90 where a trucker swore he saw a woman in white stepping out from the heat shimmer. I was freelancing for whoever would pay. Regional magazine, public radio, a couple of true crime podcasts that liked Texas grit but didn't care to send someone out into it. I did the driving, the waiting, the talking gently to old men who didn't trust reporters and young women who did, right until the moment they saw their words in print. By late summer, the heat had settled in like a stubborn guest. Daytime was a furnace glare off windshields and gas station roofs. Nights were a different kind of oppressive. The air held close to your mouth, the cicadas sawing through what little calm the dark allowed. That was when I took the assignment in Siguan, an overnight at the Magnolia Hotel, the one on Crockett Street, the one with the wide front porch and the windows that look like eyes that have watched too much. The pitch had been easy to sell. Room for one more, why haunted hotels keep a bed turned down. I'd heard the stories everyone hears around here. Spirits of prisoners once chained in a crude jail when the hotel was new. The woman who bled out in a second-floor room after a man no one could name left at dawn. A little girl named Emma, who lost the thread of her life somewhere in the hall and followed the pattern right into our time. A safe story, a late-night radio voice kind of story. Except the Magnolia had its own way of changing categories. I drove in on a Thursday, letting the sun drop behind me, heading east from New Braunfels, the highway boring through pecan orchards and low stretches of brush. A storm was idling up over the plains, not committed, just offering a dry lightning show behind a curtain of heat lightning. I rolled the window down. The air was thick and sweet with cut grass and something else. Wet wood, old plaster maybe, or that smell you get only in buildings that have seen their share of summer nights. I told myself I'd sleep on the second floor, get a handful of quotes, record some ambience, and be back home in my own bed before the weekend. The night doesn't care what you tell yourself. Seguin itself at night makes a compact kind of music. Diesel engines whispering past the courthouse square, the clack of a lone skateboard on the sidewalk, a laugh that sounds like a bottle rolling. The Magnolia sits a little off the main street, not shy at all about being what it is, 2 stories of limestone and timber, A front porch sagging under the weight of people who've loved it and a few who haven't. A plaque out front turns years into a paragraph. Stagecoaches, cattle drives, soldiers who slept cheap and took hard coffee, proprietors who changed their names and the color of the lobby walls as the century did its work. The stories behave in public, typed and framed. Friendly spirits, beloved little Emma. You save the other words for after midnight. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon oil and old quilts. A woman in her 60s met me at the desk. Her hair braided back tight, her face the sun-worn kind you learn to trust. She introduced herself as Joan. I told her why I was there. She nodded like she'd known all along. "Pick any room you like," she said, "except the blue room, it's spoken for. By," she smiled, "by the person who always reserves it." I didn't press. "There are some details you don't rush." I signed the ledger, the old-fashioned kind with columns and a weight to the paper. The pen dragged a little. Maybe the ink was thick. Maybe my hand was. "Emma's on the second floor," Joan said, as if telling me where the ice machine was. "She likes to line up the buttons guests leave behind. We find one every week or so in the hallway, even when it's not from a guest. Don't step on them barefoot. Not because it'll hurt, because you might pick up something you don't want." She said it so gently that I laughed to myself. A small sound swallowed by the lobby. Then she reached under the desk for a key about as big as my palm. A brass oval stamped with the number 7. "You'll sleep in the writer's room," she said. "It used to be the office for the man who took the money. Since then, we lend it to people who take down stories. They leave something behind most times." She pointed at my bag. "You'll want your recorder, Mr. Mirrorless. We hear them better that way. Driving around Texas, you learn to stand in a threshold and let your eyes tell the rest of you whether to go in." The writer's room wore its years like polish. A narrow bed with a quilt no one would dare wash in a machine. A writing table with a scar in it. The kind that comes from knocking a bottle over. Not whiskey, I thought, something clearer. Gin, maybe. The ring it left a pale halo. A washstand with a porcelain basin. Decorative now, emptied of its ghosts. A window over Crockett Street. The glass old enough to ripple the view like heat. On the wall, an arrangement of keys that had no business opening anything anymore. That and a photograph. A man with a mustache. A woman with the stern set to her mouth that I've seen in pictures from the time when you had to sit very still to be remembered. I set my bag down, and that's when I noticed the button on the floor, right by the bedpost. Pale blue, 2 holes, a chip on one edge like a little bite. I picked it up and set it on the writing table and said, because I talk to empty rooms like that, "Don't worry, Emma, I'll put it back exactly where you left it." The magnolia has a way of bringing you into its time. I drifted down to the lobby, where the parlor fan whispered over a settee someone had reupholstered in a floral pattern that looked like the 1980s, trying to remember the 1900s. A guest book lay open with scrawled comments. Heard boots on the stairs at 3:12 a.m. and smelled cigar smoke when no one in my party smokes, and Emma, thank you for the hug. I recorded a little audio fan, ice clink in a highball, a door easing open and shut. Joan disappeared into the back and emerged with a glass of iced tea and a plate of shortbread cookies that tasted like every grandmother's kitchen at once. "You'll want to walk the hall around 10, she told me. "That's when the rooms do their saying." "The rooms," I repeated. I should have heard the warning in my own voice, but sometimes a sentence is only the air of it until later. "Every room has a story," she said. "You're here to hear them, aren't you? No one ever comes for the sheets?" She smiled at that, like it was a joke that had chosen her as a home. "And keep the door to room 7 propped open for a bit. The air moves better that way." I went upstairs again as the sky outside slid into the color of bruises. The hallway was lined with framed scraps. Yellowed receipts, newspaper clippings, a photograph of a young girl with hair ribboned back and eyes that seemed intent on something just past the camera. Emma, of course. Someone had tucked a paper crane into the corner of the frame. Its wings were bent up like hands in prayer. At 10, the hallway changed temperature. Not colder exactly, but different. Like stepping into shade you can't see. The air had the taste of rainwater held in old wood. The doors seemed closer. The carpet more serious about holding the marks of your shoes. I walked slowly, letting each threshold breathe. Down at the end, a door with peeling paint and a sign. The blue room. "Spoken for," Joan had said. I didn't go near it. There are rules your bones know even when your head wants to act like there aren't. I recorded the length of the hall, then stopped. When you're chasing a story about ghosts, you have to be careful not to make the sounds you want to find. I set the recorder on the floor and stepped back, my spine against the wall, feeling the building move around me the way a sleeping animal moves in its sleep. That's when I heard the first voice. It was a murmur more than a word, a throat clearing itself of time. It came from room 3, the door barely ajar, a ribbon of light from the window inside laying a stripe on the hallway carpet. A man's voice, dry and careful. "Ledger says you owe," it said. And then something else I couldn't catch, and a laugh that wasn't mean but wasn't kind either. Another voice, higher, protesting in the tone of someone who has learned that protests do not serve. I looked at the gap of the door and saw only the line of light and a sliver of the room's wallpaper. Flowers marching toward a ceiling I couldn't see. My mouth dried out in a hurry. I thought of the story I wanted to file. How it would need a scene that justified my miles. How you can't deliver radio with dead air. "Evan," a small voice said. And I knew before I knew that it was a child's voice. It came from behind me. The way echoes sometimes do when they get confused. "You're stepping on my buttons," I looked down. The hallway runner was pale and faded and bare. My shoes were on it. That was all. But the voice was patient. "You took one," she said. "You meant to put it back." She had the practical tone of a little girl who has come to terms with her specialty in the family, the one who collects what others drop. I opened my mouth, and what came out appalled me, because it sounded like a man talking to a child in a grocery store aisle. "I did, sweetheart. I'll put it back now." I reached in my pocket because somehow I'd put the button there instead of on the writing table. My fingers found smoothness, the cool of old plastic. I knelt and set the button down as carefully as if it were the first sentence of a thing I couldn't afford to get wrong. "Thank you," Emma said. "They send me to get them, but they don't tell me where." "You were easy. You said please when you opened the door. Most don't." "Who sends you?" I asked, and it felt like blasphemy even to frame it. "The rooms," she said as if I hadn't been listening. "They like their things back." Something brushed my sleeve then, the lightest touch, like the static cling of a dress as you pull it from a dryer. I didn't run. You don't run in a place like that. It notices you faster if you run. I stood and felt the length of the hallway like a responsibility. Doors on either side, each with its own draft of story pressing out and in. Back in room 7, I set the recorder on the writing table next to my notebook. I wrote down what I'd heard, the old muscle memory of it doing something steady to my breathing. I'd get this down, I would. There were rules to a story: place, person, voice. That's how you ward off the parts that want to swallow you. Give them paragraphs to live in instead. 11:30. I lay on the bed, not undressed, the quilt covering my legs. I left the door open an inch like Joan had advised. The street outside had quieted to occasional tires whispering over asphalt. A diesel downshifted 2 blocks away. A bell in the distance telling some small hour only the devout attend to. I closed my eyes. The building shifted its weight and settled. If I slept, it was the kind of shallow rest travelers know, the surface of a pond you never quite break. I must have drifted because when I came back up there was a voice in the room with me. It was the tone people use when they know your name and not much else. "Mr. Miralles," it said. "I'll need your signature." I turned my head. The writing table was occupied. There was a man sitting there who didn't trouble the room with his outline so much as insinuate himself into it. The lamp at the table didn't change its radius of light, but the space inside it had grown more crowded. He had on shirt sleeves despite the heat. His hair was combed like something he'd learned once and stuck with. He was rolling a pen in his fingers, a pen so real I felt protective of my notebook's margins. "What for?" I asked, and something inside me scolded me for the question. The better question was who. But I already knew. He was the man from the photograph, made of the same insistence. "For the room," he said. "You'll be staying." He pushed a ledger toward me, a book impossibly familiar. And when it slid across the table, I heard the rasp of paper over wood. A sound like a breath taken through teeth. I sat up, my shoes scraping the floor. "I'm checking out in the morning," I said. "I'm writing a story. I'm not—" The word staying had gathered thorns by the time it left my mouth. He smiled. It was not cruel. It was the smile of an owner who doesn't feel the need to raise his voice. "Everyone writes a story," he said. "It's what we do. We take names down. The rooms keep the rest. Who are you?" I asked, and this time the question behaved. He paused as if allowing me the satisfaction of hearing it. Are you asking what they called me? He said, or what I am? Both, I said. And I hate how small I sounded. They called me March, he said. Mr. March when they wanted something. As for what I am, he tapped the ledger with one finger. The nail was perfectly kept. I am the difference between a story told around a table and a life put in a bed and tucked in tight. You came to be tucked in, the light shifted. The angle of it changed. My mouth tasted metallic like the moment before a lightning strike. I thought of the blue room down the hall, the one spoken for. I thought of Emma walking the runner with her bare feet, collecting what the rooms asked of her. Buttons, names. I can't stay, I said. I almost said deadlines, as if time had anything to do with this place. I have people, I said instead, and that was stupid too. I could see them in my mind, exactly who I meant. My father in a recliner with a game on low. My sister, Alina, who taught 3rd grade and yelled at the news during dinner. My friend Thomas, who still owed me $20 from a Spurs game. I could see them and feel that I had left postcards of myself with each of them and that those postcards were fading. Everyone has people, March said. The rooms have people too. They feed them. You mean guests? I asked because that was all I had left in the way of courage. The trick of making the wrong word sound like it might be right if you kicked at it enough. He didn't answer. He stood, and the chair made the kind of noise a chair makes when the weight of a man rises from it. He gestured toward the ledger. I didn't go. For the first time, I felt anger take up a space in me where fear had been sitting. I stood to the full height I could find and walked to the table and shut the book. The room changed key. When a building's been used to hold people and their heat and their language, it learns to read a gesture. It knows defiance and compliance the way a bartender knows tip money by the sound it makes hitting the jar. Closing that ledger was a kind of cuss. Something in the walls took offense. The temperature dropped. No, the temperature didn't drop. The memory of warmth was removed. The lamp glowed harder to prove a point. The bed seemed farther from the door than it had been. Emma, I said, because it came to me that children can be convinced where men cannot. Sweetheart, can you take my button? She didn't answer, not with her voice. The button I had returned lifted from the writing table as if a breeze had found a way to gather itself only there. It moved to the edge, tipped, and fell. It didn't make a sound when it landed. Please, I said, and this time it was a prayer. Take it to whoever makes the rooms happy. Tell them I brought it back. March watched me with the mild interest of a man at a card table considering whether to cut the deck. It's not about the taking, he said. It's about the placing. I'll place it, I said. Where do you want it? He cocked his head. The hallway heard us decide and came to stand outside the door. I could feel it there, the magnolia itself taking the shape of intent. The building wanted a signature. The building wanted the soft weight of a body lying and deciding not to rise. The building wanted another voice to tell at 10 o'clock what it had learned. One more room had a space inside its story that resembled me. Place it where you first took it, March said. We only ask for the shape to be respected. The floor by the bedpost, I said, and I felt the word bed, like a hand on the back of my head, pressing. I knelt and set the button on the floorboards. It looked small and obscene there, a pale dot in a dark equation. I felt ridiculous. The building breathed. The lamp flickered. No, I won't use that word. It didn't flicker like a trick. It commented. It said in its way, this is acceptable. I stood, the room in my bones now. I told myself I would make it to the lobby, that I would make my mouth explain to Joan that I needed to leave. I could see the front door, the porch, the street, the dark trees beyond lining the river with their depthless cool. I could see my car, the steering wheel shining, my key in my pocket as reliable as a talisman. I could get to any of it, I told myself. Mr. Mireless, March said, and the voice was kind enough to be terrible. You will, of course, still need to sign. I went to the table because people in rooms do what the voice asks when the voice belongs to the room. I took the pen and it was too heavy, and it wanted my hand to make my name look more like names made 130 years ago. Loops and flourishes, letters that existed in the space where men understood their own names to be more important than the hour. The ledger was open to names I didn't recognize. Not Joan, not the couple who'd signed the guest book and thanked Emma. Names that felt like the sound of boot heels. Names that felt like the clink of iron on brick. A woman's name written in a hand that stopped halfway and never resumed. Date? March said, and the room chuckled because dates are a kind of joke in a house like this. August, I said, and it felt like a lie. August 24th, the pen scratched. The page absorbed. My name slid into the shape the hotel knew how to keep. I looked up. There was a second signature line beneath mine. Room, it said, and a blank. Don't, I said, though no one had reached for the pen. That's not mine. Emma's hand, if that's what it was, lifted the pen and moved it easily because children know how to fit into spaces you don't understand. She drew a small curve on the line. It wasn't a letter. It was a mark a child makes on a wall to show she's growing. The hotel accepted it. Thank you, March said. And for a moment it was exactly that, a transaction completed. He closed the book and the click of it made something in my teeth ache. When he looked up again, he was the well-dressed shadow the photograph had made him. Then he wasn't at all. A room is still full when it empties. I slept then. Not because it was safe, but because the alternative was to sit on the bed and listen to each second decide whether I would continue to see it. The quilt held me. The door stood treacherously open the inch of it that meant I had agreed to something. I dreamed about the river and the way it looks in September, when the heat finally loses its job and the water takes a breath without steam rising from it. I dreamed of highway shoulders and the way memorials begin with a couple of plastic flowers, and then become a thing that has to be dusted by someone who claims it. I dreamed I was on the porch of the Magnolia Hotel, and that the porch belonged to a building that had learned the polite way to ask for things it intended to take. Morning was plain and merciless. Sun on the window. A truck downshifting outside. I sat up. My mouth tasted the way hotel mouths taste. For a panicked second, I didn't know whether I had meant to leave. Then I was on my feet. The room both new and exactly as it had been. The ledger a square of darker wood where it had sat. My recorder on the table with its red eye lit steady somehow through the night. My notebook opened to a page where my handwriting had gone uphill as if climbing out of something. Joan was at the desk, a ceramic mug held in both hands like the world's first warm thing. She looked at me and did not look surprised. "How'd you sleep?" "I slept," I said, and my voice found the exact center of true. "You hear them?" she asked. "Yes," I said. They wanted me to stay." Her eyes were kind. "They always want that," she said. "They have their way." "Did you give them a yes?" I opened my mouth to say the sentence I needed. "No, I didn't sign. But my mouth is just one instrument. The body keeps its own records." Something in my hand remembered the feel of the pen. Something in my shoulder remembered the angle of leaning over a table with a book in front of me. The word arrived wrong. I said, and couldn't help it, my voice shook. "I think I gave them something." Joan nodded. "You'll be all right," she said. "They're fond of you. They like writers. They like anyone who knows how to put their palm down flat on a table and hold still." "I have to go," I said. "I have to file. I didn't finish because the list was silly." She poured coffee into a paper cup and set it on the counter. "There's a button by your tire," she said. "Take it with you. You'll know when to bring it back." I paid. My card beeped its approval. The receipt printed and curled at the edge like a fish dying. I stood on the porch and looked hard at the street. The day was full of the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. That there is a difference between one building and the next. That doors mean more than they do. That travel is movement instead of a kind of selection done to us by our own feet. At my car, the button waited, pale blue. I picked it up and put it in the cup holder. The engine turned over like a familiar dog getting to its feet. I pulled away, the magnolia in the mirror, shrinking to something you could put on a postcard and forget. I did not file the story. I told myself I needed a framing device I hadn't found yet. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the audio had a hum I needed to clean. I told myself a number of things that looked like work from far away. It's remarkable the number of sentences you can arrange in a row to avoid saying the one that would crack you open. The next week, I took a flood assignment along the San Marcos River and slept in my truck under a flyover listening to the swallows talk about storms. The week after that, I followed a tip about a church basement soup kitchen where the bowls were always full and no one would say who paid for the groceries. I drove the 100-mile loops Texas gives you when you don't know whether you're leaving or coming back. And not once did I pass the exit for Sagan without my hands tightening on the wheel, as if the car had opinions of its own. 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of someone walking down my apartment hallway. A mistake. I thought at first, then memory catching up to me. I live alone. The steps were small and careful, bare feet on vinyl. They paused just outside my bedroom door. "Emma?" I said into a dark that had softened for morning. It was not a brave thing to say, but it was the truest. The silence that answered had a weight to it. I could feel the shape of a little hand in the air, hovering just above the knob, waiting for permission. "You can come in," I said, and I meant it for reasons that had nothing to do with being unafraid. The door didn't open, but the mattress dipped, like a child sitting at the edge of a bed thinking half of a thought. A small sigh happened that sounded exactly like a girl who has been about her business and takes her rest where she can find it. Without asking, "I brought you one," she said after a while, her voice the soft weave of morning. "They said you should give it back yourself, but I know the hall better." The button in my cup holder was not the one I'd left on the floor of room 7. I knew that somehow and didn't know how to know it. This one was darker. 4 holes instead of 2. It belonged on a coat that had been worn on a porch at dawn. I could see that much by touching it in the air, though my hand never moved. I wanted to ask her questions, the ones you keep inside for children. Are you sad? Are you lonely? Do you remember the days when your feet were dirty with summer? Can you see the river? Did your mother call you in from the yard for dinner and did you pretend not to hear? What do they do with the buttons? I asked, and that was the one she could answer. They keep them, she said. They're the only small thing that belongs to you that you forget to count. I went back to Seguin the next day. Of course I did. There are roads built for return. I drove in under a sky with the same old argument going on between thunderheads and heat. The courtroom square was holding a farmer's market. People with plastic bags and straw hats, peaches they would set on windowsills because that's a thing that makes time smell pretty. The magnolia stood in its place. A for rent sign was taped to a storefront across the street, and a man with a little dog had stopped to read it, one hand on his hip. The hotel's porch was empty, its rocking chairs angled like pieces on a chessboard waiting for players. Inside, the lobby had taken a deep breath. Joan wasn't at the desk. A man in a suit now, that's silly I know, but it's the word the room gave me, stood with one hand on the ledger lightly, like a pianist testing a key. He smiled at me. Not March, younger. Cheeks pink with health no one had any business claiming. The magnolia would never be so vulgar as to show you a composite image of what you feared. It is more creative than that. We've been expecting you, he said, and the building nodded. Where's Joan? I asked, hearing the schoolboy panic in the question. When you're in a place that works by rules that never got written, you cling to the person who poured you iced tea. On an errand, he said. People have errands. Rooms have errands too. I brought the button, I said. I set it on the desk and then realized my mistake. You don't place offerings on counters that aren't altars. I picked it up again. The man watched me with courtesy. Room 7, I said. Can I? Of course, he said, and slid the key forward. The brass oval, old enough to make even now feel like something that had happened once and was trying it again for practice. You'll want to keep your door propped, up the stairs. The hall runner had been cleaned or replaced, or perhaps the hotel had simply decided to resemble the kind of place where rugs are attended to. Keys framed on the wall, Emma's photograph straight. The blue room door shut tight, the paint around the knob worn by hands that had dared and been taught better. Room 7 had not changed. The air had my shape in it from the last time I'd been there. The writing table bore the scar. The ledger was absent, of course, because the desk downstairs was a better place to keep a mouth. I set the button on the floor by the bedpost without ceremony. The air eased in that precise little way old houses have, when they approve of you taking off your boots before stepping on their good wood. The light from the window did that slow swimming thing glass does when it's been hot enough times to learn the rhythm of summer. You can tell them I returned it, I said, and let the silliness stay in the room with me. You can tell them I'm leaving now. You can tell them yourself, a voice said from the hallway, and it was a voice I recognized. Joan. She stood in the doorway, her braid neat. Her mouth set in its line that said she'd seen both forms of hospitality and chosen. They'd rather hear it from you. They like directness. Do they let people go, I asked, or do the people go and find themselves back here again no matter where they aimed the car? She considered. The rooms are better at asking than at chasing, she said. But they don't forget your name. And they keep the bed turned down. She touched the door with her fingertips. You slept well for them. They noticed. Joan, I said. And the name felt like a life preserver. Did I sign the book? That night? She tilted her head. Most do something like that. Doesn't look like ink when we look at it. But they signed something. You did, yes. Is there a way to unsign? I asked, surprising myself with the childlike word. She didn't answer right away. Tell me what happened in the room, she said. Say it to me like you'd say it to your recorder, and don't leave out the parts that feel like superstition. I told her. The man named March, the ledger, the ache in my teeth when it closed. The way a button is not a trinket in a place like this, but a measure of whether you've been accounted for. I told her the part about Emma bringing me one in my apartment, and if she thought I was trying to flatter the room with my story, she didn't let it show. Good, she said when I was out of breath. Now say the part they care about. I knew the part. I won't stay, I said, and then added the only thing that made it not a lie. Not yet. The hotel respected the syntax. Not yet. I could feel it repeat to itself like a houseplant turning toward the kind of light it likes best. Take your recorder, Joan said. Leave your notebook. They like to keep your handwriting on their side of things. It helps them remember you the way you know yourself. What happens if I don't leave anything? I asked. They send Emma, she said, and we both looked down at the floor where the button lay. A pale coin in the treasury of the quiet. I left the notebook. Back home, I tried to live like a man who had not promised something to a building. I failed in small ways and then in larger ones. I found myself driving loops that landed me near enough Sagan to feel the town's relaxed lean into its own history. I started noticing buttons the way a person notices repeated numbers on clocks, everywhere, then nowhere, then in the exact place a story asks for them. The cuffs of strangers, the gutter outside a cafe, the floorboard of my car where I was sure I'd cleaned out all the grit and still there it was. A mother-of-pearl dot that had ridden in on the shoes of whatever I had become. When the call came for a radio piece on haunted hotels, Halloween approaching, sponsors pleased by the easy spike in listeners, I said yes. I wrote my notes like a man making a grocery list for a kitchen he knew had already been stocked by some other appetites. I went back to the Magnolia on a night when the rain was doing its gentle pelt on the street, and the trees around the river had leaned inward for a conversation they would not summarize for the likes of me. I carried my recorder like a talisman, and my body like something borrowed. The lobby welcomed me with the mild gust of old air that is the only embrace some buildings know how to offer. Room for one more? I said to the desk, because that sort of cheap line can sometimes save you. The man with the pianist's hand smiled. Always, he said, and slid the key across the desk. The brass was warm, as if someone had held it. Perhaps someone had. I went up the stairs. The hallway knew the turn of my shoulder. The runner was patient under my feet. I passed the blue room and didn't look. I told myself my story would have its shape. Introduction, escalation, revelation. I told myself the ending would be a good one. Unsettling enough to please the editors, tidy enough to let me sleep. The writer's room opened like a mouth that's learned the right word for you. I stepped inside and the air arranged itself around the places where I had been. On the table, my notebook lay where I had left it, the pen across it like a bar someone had placed to keep a door shut. I reached for it and felt the answer to the oldest question. Who owns your name when you write it down? The ledger was on the bed. That was new. Brass corners. Leather that had a smell to it, nothing like rot, nothing like mold. More like a box where someone had kept photographs in a closet and the paper had remembered the perfume of a woman who had not set foot in the room in 60 years. The book was open to a page with a date that made no sense. Not August. Not any month. A date the hotel had made because the hotel had decided it needed one. My name was there or something like it. The letters slanted toward a future they had agreed to be part of. Mr. Mireless, March said, and I did not see him, but I saw where he had been. The air had a dent in it exactly the shape of a man who thinks he's the one who gets to keep records. I can't, I said, though no one had asked yet. Not tonight. Of course not, he said, and I loved him and hated him for being so decent about it. Rooms are patient. The house is patient. A pause. We've been telling your story in the hall at 10. They like the part with the pen. They like the part where you say not yet and mean it. I brought my recorder, I said. You can talk into it if you want. We don't need to be recorded, he said gently. You do. The rain intensified and then forgot to. I sat on the bed and the ledger sat beside me like a dog that has come to understand your moods. I clicked the recorder on. It made its red light. I said the tissues a radio piece needs. The name of the place, the way the floor sounds, the history people like to hear boiled down into something that feels like fact. I told the story of my first night like I was telling a friend who had leaned too close to the fire. I said Emma's name in a tone that made a room clear its throat. I said March's name and the window breathed out. I didn't listen back that night. I didn't have to. When I stood to leave, the hotel somehow opened the door for me and then stood aside in the hallway like an old aunt at a wedding. I descended the stairs and put the key on the desk where a hand was waiting and stepped onto the porch where the rocking chairs were empty and the rain made halos on the wood. The street was the same street I'd stepped onto a dozen times. The night air had the same temperature it has when you're not sure if it will forgive you. I walked to my car. The button I had returned to me. It sat in the cup holder, pale as the inside of a shell. I don't know how long a person can share a story with a building before one of them owns it. I could pretend I didn't find out. I could pretend I send this as a piece for you to use, cut into segments with a music bed and a voiceover. I could pretend the ending is still in my pocket. But endings like this aren't something you carry out. They wait for you where you agreed to meet them. My name is Evan Myralis and I'm from New Braunfels. I am a journalist. Not the kind that breaks governments, the kind that brings you a cup of coffee and a quiet question, and then holds the silence until it gives back something shaped like truth. I stayed one night at the Magnolia Hotel in Seguin, in the writer's room with the door cracked for the hall and the window giving me the street and the smell of rain and old wood. I heard voices. I gave a button back that wasn't mine to keep. I signed a ledger that looks blank if you glance. I left my notebook there because the room's asked nice. It's been a season since then. The air has changed twice. The river has lowered itself. The highway has been itself in 100 ways. Most nights I sleep fine. On the others, I hear a hallway runner in my apartment that I do not own. I hear the small arithmetic of a child placing buttons in a row. I hear a book close in a distant room and feel a mild ache in my teeth that I used to think meant I needed a dentist, and now know means only that a page has been decided. People tell me to be careful. They say don't go back. They say don't write it down. They say you can keep a thing out of your house if you refuse it at the door, but houses know their own. Roads know their own. Rooms keep the bed turned down. Room for one more, the sign in the lobby suggests without needing ink. The porch waits. The chairs face the street like they're evaluating candidates. This recording, maybe you'll hear it late at night when your own house has settled and your own hall holds whatever it holds. Maybe you'll hear it in your car and think about exits you don't take. Maybe you'll hear it in a hotel bed in a town you barely listen to when you pronounce its name. I am telling you this because you need to hear it, the way I needed to hear it. Every room has a story and it will tell it to you, and if you're not careful, it will let you finish the sentence in your voice. The Magnolia Hotel in Seguin is a safe haven for the tired. It is a sanctuary for ghosts. It was kind to me. It is kind to anyone who knows the way a pen feels when it is the only thing in a room that weighs more than a person. If you're watching this, know that the house is patient and exacting. It keeps accounts. It prefers those who can set down a line that holds. If you visit, as you will because there is a road and people take roads, keep your shoes on in the hall. Return what you find on the floor. Do not speak disrespectfully to the doors. If you are asked to sign, be sure what shape you want your name to keep. And if you sleep there, if you let the quilt hold your legs and the window ripple your view, and the room learn the measure of your breath, understand that you have given it permission to remember you. I drove past the Magnolia tonight. I kept going because I had a deadline I didn't believe in. In the mirror, I saw the porch light. Yellow, respectable, a house that wishes you a pleasant evening and means it. The sky over the river decided on a storm it had postponed. The first drop hit my windshield like a coin. In the cup holder, the button moved. Though the road was straight, I turned around because there are things you go back for, small things with holes in them. And because in the hall at 10 o'clock tonight, a story will be told about how a man learned to write his own name, and then learned what it cost to leave it behind. When you reach this part, if you pause the playback and listen past your room's hum, past your breathing, past the electric life of your appliances, you might hear a bit of hallway runner sound, a child's weight making an honest creak, and a ledger closing a floor away. If so, don't be afraid. Fear is a door and you do not want to rush the part where it opens. Just sit and let the room around you behave like a room and tell it, calmly and exactly, where you are from and what name you prefer to be called. It will be polite. It will write you down. It will keep a bed turned down for you in case the road you drive some night brings you to Siguan. With rain in the air, and a story in your pocket, and a button, small and patient, waiting to be placed where it belongs. My name is Caleb Meyerless, and I'm from Lockhart, Texas. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. It started like a dare we didn't speak out loud. June air clung to us in Austin, heavy and warm. The kind of heat that turns streetlights into halos and coats everything in a soft, unreal glow. We were driving up Congress after the reception, the city shining like a promise we believed we'd earned. Nina slept with her head back, veil bunched in her lap, lips parted just enough to show a flash of teeth with each breath. The window was cracked and the night came in, warm and perfumed with the damp scent of the river and late jasmine tangled in iron fences. When I turned left and saw the Driscoll, the long porch, the Romanesque brick and limestone like a grand old governor who never had to shout to be obeyed, I felt something in my chest slide into place. This was the place you picked if you meant to remember a night forever. This was the place you picked if you wanted to be remembered by it. We checked in just before 1 in the morning. The lobby was cool and faintly floral, a hush like a Sunday church. Marble floors gleamed with long reflections. Leather chairs slouched handsomely beneath portraits of cattle barons and senators who'd done their bargaining, with a whiskey glass sweating in one hand. There is a hush old buildings have. The confidence of knowing the living are only tenants. The bellman who took our bag had a pinkish scar on his cheek and the tight smile of someone trained not to show fatigue. He congratulated us, lifted our suitcase, and led us past a wall of framed photographs, debutantes, governors, a Texas Ranger in starched khaki, and to an elevator with brass gates that pinched closed like fingers. In the mirror I saw Nina laugh silently, veil slipping forward, eyes red-rimmed from champagne and tears. I touched her shoulder and felt the softness of tulle under my hand. The elevator creaked up like a winded animal. The bellman used a key to steady the gate at the 5th floor and led us down a hallway whose carpet ate our footfalls. It smelled like flowers and dust, as if a wedding could rot. We passed a sitting niche with a velvet couch and a table where someone had left a glass with a lipstick print. Nina squeezed my hand, held it high like a prize ribbon. The bellman stopped at 5:25 and without looking at us slid the keycard. The green light winked and the door opened with a breath. The suite was absurd in the way only old luxury feels absurd. High ceilings, draperies heavy enough to muffle a gunshot, a bed like a small stage. There was a sitting room and a bedroom, a bath with a clawfoot tub and a gilt mirror that made your face look bruised. The curtains were drawn, but light from the city seeped in at the edges, making the room seem lit from under the skin. On the coffee table, a silver ice bucket, 2 flutes, and a card tied with a cream ribbon. A spray of white lilies that looked difficult to hold. Each flower a hand turned inside out. That was the first wrong note. The lilies were fresh, cold to the touch, but there was pollen on the table, little yellow clots as if a bouquet had been there a while. The bellman placed our bag in the bedroom and withdrew before I could tip him. He had vanished like someone who knew not to linger. Nina pulled off her shoes and walked barefoot to the window. "We can't see the Capitol," she said, "just a fact, no disappointment. But we can hear the street." I did hear it. Horns, a burst of laughter from someone who believed dawn would never find them, a siren that was more memory than sound. I opened the card and read the hospitality script out loud, laughing at the formal voice that called us by both our names. There was another card under it, smaller, older. The cursive was looping and stubborn, the blue ink gone to gray. It said, "It's not unusual to be nervous. There are rooms for nerves and rooms for deciding. You are in a deciding room." I looked at Nina and asked where she found this joke card. She said she hadn't seen it. She wanted to shower and wash away the cake frosting that had found her elbow, and the dew of the night that had found every inch of us. She took her dress off with the calm of someone removing armor, folded it without fuss and carried it to the built-in wardrobe. She moved like she always had, careful, deliberate, letting each object know it wasn't forgotten. I watched her go, thinking how small she looked without the dress, how the dips of her collarbones looked like shelves you could leave a promise on. I wanted to be only happy, to be the boy from Lockhart who got lucky, who married above his station and knew it. But there was a slick of dread in me, strange and flavorless, the way you sometimes feel on a bridge when the wind rises. I told myself it was the weight of the night. I told myself it was the lilies. In the bathroom, the tub's faucets were stamped with delicate letters for hot and cold. When she turned them, the pipes shuddered and invented steam. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the mattress buoy like a raft. My eyes went to the gilt mirror across from the footboard, and for a moment I saw a veil. Just the whisper of it, a suggestion of gauze being lifted with no hands. The sight made me stand quickly, then laugh at myself, and then check the closet for places a prank could hide. There were none, only cedar smell and space. When I returned to the sitting room, the lilies were louder. Not sound, but presence. Someone had said once that lilies smell like funerals because the undertaker's room's filled with them, but there was another sweetness in them. Like talcum, like wedding powder. I poured us champagne and left Nina's flute by the tub. She gave a grateful hum and lifted her hair so I could set the glass on the tile. I ran a finger along the fogged mirror and drew half a heart before wiping it away, ashamed. I told her I'd go downstairs for ice because the bucket had cooled and gone wet. She blew me a kiss, shoulder showing, steam curling upward. In the elevator, the brass was warm, as if many hands had just been there. At the lobby desk, I asked for more ice, and the clerk, a young woman with an elegant neck and a watch older than she was, nodded and lifted a silver scoop. When she glanced at my key folder, she paused. "Oh," she said, and her smile thinned. "You're in 525, how's everything?" She asked it like a doctor who had just read a test result and didn't want to ask if I'd told my family. "Beautiful," I said. "Smells like lilies." She stopped scooping. The ice clinked once in the bucket as if someone had moved. "Of course," she said. "Congratulations again." And then, lowering her voice, "We have a strict policy now about quiet hours on 5. If you encounter anything that seems—" She didn't finish. The bellman with the scar appeared at her shoulder, and they shared the smallest look, the kind that leaves no fingerprints. On the way upstairs, I ran into a cleaning cart parked neatly near the elevator, a toilet paper roll folded to a perfect diamond point. The maid's closet door was open. I called a greeting and no one answered. Behind the cleaning bottles, aqua glass, whipped white scum at the lips, was a picture tacked to the corkboard. A black and white bride with a bouquet so big it obscured her waist. She had that soft look old photographs give eyes. Underneath, someone had written 1928. The diamond of folded toilet paper was suddenly ridiculous and terrifying, the way a smile on a mannequin becomes obscene if you stand with it too long. I closed the closet carefully and told myself folklore was a kind of hospitality, a way for a place to keep itself interesting. Back in the suite, steam had fogged the bathroom and the mirror was glistening with drops that trembled in place. Nina had her head back against the tub's rolled edge, eyes closed. A strand of hair had pasted itself across her cheek. I set the bucket down quietly and circled the tub to kiss her forehead. And in the fogged glass, I saw the same half-heart I had wiped away, now completed by a second curved stroke I hadn't drawn. Inside the heart was written in the lettered hand of a girl who learned by tracing, "Do you promise?" I wiped it hard, smearing it into a blur with my forearm. I told her the mirror was asking us to sign the guest book. My voice was too bright. She opened her eyes and smiled and looked at me like I was the show she had bought a ticket for. The water sloshed gently. She said she wanted to soak until her fingers pruned, and then wanted me to carry her to bed, and then wanted to wake up and walk to the river in the blue heat of morning. She said it as if naming it could make it true. I went into the bedroom and picked up my phone. There were messages already. Cousins and friends who had gone home and couldn't sleep. Photos of us with confetti in our hair. In each picture, we were just to the left of ourselves. Nina's eyes were always looking at me, and mine were always looking at the space beside her where I thought the future stood. I typed a reply and then backspaced everything, ashamed of how much I wanted that future to hurry. In the mirror above the dresser, the room looked more expensive, and I looked like a boy who had been allowed into it on a pass. The closet door was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, the dress hung like a collapsed cake, and behind it, in the narrow space where the closet breathed, a second hanger held a veil I had never seen. Not Nina's. Finer, weightless, the netting scalloped at the edge like lace cut from frost. It smelled like a saddle did after a parade. Starch, leather, flowers, and close air. I reached out to touch it and the veil lifted just a fraction as if to meet me. Beneath the veil there was a shoe. Not Nina's shoe. A satin slipper whose silk had gone dull, the bow flattened to a little mouth. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the wood. I told myself it was a prop the hotel used, something staff installed to create an effect, an Instagram, a whisper you would carry to friends back home. When I opened the door again, the veil had been pushed gently to the side so I could see the shoe more clearly, and on the back wall, in pencil, was date after date after date. January 4th, March 30th, June 12th, no year, just days that looked like scratches made during a long phone call. I slid the door shut and heard the thin metal shutter on its track like a drawn breath. Nina was singing in the tub when the suite's phone rang. Landline, heavy beige. The ring sounded the way a hospital always sounds, as if the air was ringing too. I answered, and a woman's voice told me with a softness that assumed my gratitude that midnight coffee and petit fours were available for honeymooners upon request. "We want you to have exactly the kind of night you wish," she said. I thanked her and said we were grand. We needed nothing, and when I hung up, the phone rang again so quickly that it sounded like the same breath. I answered, and the same voice spoke the same sentence in the same tone. Only there was a skip on the word wish so that it became two pieces, W and ish, and then a hush on the wire like someone had put their mouth to the receiver and breathed a veil across it. "Nina?" I said toward the bathroom doorway, and I hated how I said her name, careful and bright like calling a cat you don't own. No answer. Only her song, which was not actually a song, just a thin thread of sound she spun when she drifted. Somewhere in the building, a door closed decisively. The lilies were all the way at the edge of the table now, as if nudged by inches. One of their stamens had broken and lay like a line of bloodless flesh. I took a breath that scoured my throat and went into the bathroom. Nina's eyes were closed again. The water had turned from hot to warm. The heart on the mirror had been drawn a third time, crisper now with the curve perfected. And inside it was the question again, more patient. "Do you promise?" Beneath it, closer to the bottom edge of the glass, in letters taller, a second phrase, the first bride waited. The second did not. I told myself I was dreaming, and the dream had the exact weight of waking. I pressed my palm to the mirror, left a print that could have been anyone's. I crouched, placed my mouth to Nina's ear, and said we should get into bed while the sheets still remembered the day. She nodded without opening her eyes, and I had the child's thought that if I didn't look directly at the mirror, the words would stop arranging themselves in that tidy girl hand. I dried her, and she let me. I lifted her, and she laughed softly at the theater of it. I carried her to bed and laid her on the mattress. The sheet was cool. When I turned the bedroom lamps to their lowest, the room felt like an underwater stage. In the mirror at the foot of the bed I saw us, and behind us I saw a smear of white. There, not there, there again, a veil moving as if someone were turning a key in the air. I looked away and said I loved her, and she said that love with the last of the night's trust. She turned on her side, and I fit myself to her back, and the two of us made a shape that the sheet remembered, as if the last couple had practiced it until it lived in the cotton. We were just at the edge of sleep when someone knocked at the door. Not loud, not timid. 3 knocks that informed rather than requested. There was a second's pause while my mind looked for an excuse. Late night delivery, mistaken room. And then the knocks came again, 3, and this time I heard, inside them, the softness of a hand. Not knuckles, the back of fingers. Nina said and tucked her chin. I slipped out of bed, and my feet found the carpet like warm moss. At the door there was no peephole. The hotel was too certain of itself to even pretend danger. I asked, in a voice that sounded rehearsed, who was there. The answer came as a smell before a word. Cold air, flowers that had waited in a refrigerator's blue light. Somewhere close, a drop of water falling in a sink. "Bride service, Ma," said a woman with a voice that had learned to be gentle in rooms where women cried. I didn't open it. I didn't even touch the knob. Inside my chest, something argued for a ritual, that if I did as was done, if I moved as they had moved, if I did not insult the etiquette of grief, we might be spared. "We're all right," I said. "We have all we need." A pause. The sound of fabric adjusting itself like a skirt being smoothed by hands that were careful not to leave creases. "Do you promise?" she said. I stepped back. The door made a small sucking sound toward the hallway. I realized then that I had not latched it, that it could open if it wanted. I thought of the pencil dates in the closet. of the finished heart on the glass, of the veil I had not bought touched by air I had not moved. I went to the bathroom and turned both taps hard until the pipes rattled like an old man clearing his throat. The mirror stayed clear as if refusing a hiding place. When I returned to the bed, the knob turned 1 degree and then stopped. Nina inhaled and held it. Her hand found mine in the dark and gripped it with a force that said, "Not please, but now." The door never opened. The knocks never came again. What came instead was the weight in the room changing. That's the part that will sound foolish until you feel it. The way a church feels when the first mourners file in. When the volume of air and intention becomes something different. The room got denser, darker in a way that had nothing to do with the lamps. The lilies exhaled. There was breathing, but it wasn't ours, and it wasn't human breathing. It was the paced expansion of a room that had decided to live. Nina whispered that her dress was still in the closet. She said it like it mattered, like in all the ways you can be saved. Being in the right clothes is one. I don't remember putting my slippers on. I do remember the carpet being warmer in the places we had walked and cool in the strip just outside the closet. When I opened it, the veil was gone. The shoe sat alone, bow crushed, and then, impossibly only half crushed, as if a foot had slid in and then been lifted again. And on the back wall, under the ledger of days, there was a sentence penciled recently, the graphite still a bit smeary. He promised. He lied. I had promised things in my life and fallen short. I had promised Nina I would quit carpentry jobs that took me to Galveston overnight, because her mother feared the island's roads. I had promised my father I would not drive my truck too fast on the ranch road, where the asphalt buckles in summer. These were ordinary human promises, lazy little bridges we expect to hold because most of the time the river is low. But there are other promises, and the room seemed to know which kind we had told it. Marriage has a way of collecting all your smaller lies and arranging them in a bouquet you have to carry with both hands. When I shut the closet and turned around, the mirror over the dresser had gone dark. Not off, mirrors don't go off, but dark as if the room had turned its back on it. I walked to it and touched the glass, and my fingers met cold. Then a coolness that sank into my skin and stayed. My reflection emerged as if it had been wading in deep water. Only it was not quite me. It had my shoulders but not my mouth. It had my hair but not the bump over my left brow I had earned when a 2x4 slipped off a sawhorse. It watched me with my eyes and something else's patience. It lifted its hand. I did not lift mine, and for a heartbeat our hands were not aligned. I swallowed the sound that rose in my throat and told myself mirrors lie for their living. Nina said my name once, not to ask anything, but so I would know she had it. I went to her and lay down, and the sheet let out a sigh like an old woman. I smoothed it over her hips, and she placed her palm against my chest and counted a few beats, the way she did when she wanted to slow me. Our rings clicked softly. The building creaked in a long exhale that felt like a thing settling into a shape it had outgrown. I told her in a low voice about the closet, about the sentence. She said nothing for a while. Then she told me a secret. She said she had thought about not marrying me the night before, not for a reason she could name, only for a current that had run through her like a thread in a dress you pull without meaning to, and suddenly everything gathers. She said she had stood in the bathroom of her mother's house and looked at herself, and seen what a girl sees when she is the last person to know the truth. She said the feeling had passed. She said she had told herself it was nerves. There are rooms for nerves and rooms for deciding, I thought, and realized I had not told her about the first card. Morning did come. That is the strangest thing about true horror. It yields to light like everything else, and you resent it for pretending to be ordinary. The room was paler in the sun. Dust rose in tired columns. The lilies had hardened into something medicinal, the petals curling at the edges. The closet door was shut. The mirror showed only what it owed. We dressed. Nina's dress went on like it wanted to be worn. I looked at my mouth to make sure it was mine. We did not speak about leaving, because leaving felt like a bargain, and we wanted to be in the street before the hotel understood it had been outmaneuvered. At the front desk, the same clerk was on duty, now with a banana at her elbow and a newspaper folded to the weather. She asked about our stay with the kind of careful interest that prepares for both delight and complaint. Nina said lovely. I said memorable. The clerk slid our folio forward and told us that breakfast had been comped by management. We hope we'll see you again, she said, and her eyes did not expect an answer. On the steps outside, the heat slapped us like a parent who had worried and now was allowed to show it. The city roared in the bright way cities do when they are still proud to be what they are. We walked down to the river, crossed the bridge, watched the rowers scull past with their shoulders shining. "Let's drive to Lockhart," Nina said suddenly. "I want to sit at my mother's table and drink her coffee and show her my ring until her hand aches from holding it." I said yes. My body said yes. My lungs were all yes. We went back for our bag, which we had left with the bellman, and I left a tip in an envelope that said "thank you" in perfect script. We passed the wall of photographs again. The bride from 1928 was gone. In her place, a handsome governor in a hat. I blessed the common sense of furniture, the way it can be rearranged. We were at the curb waiting for valet to bring our car when a woman came down the steps in a dress that must have cost more than my truck. Her veil was folded in her hand, a fist of frost. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were wrong, glossy like stones under shallow water. She walked past us with a grace that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with practice. The bellman with the scar stepped aside and tipped his cap, and the woman descended the last step and turned with a smile that was almost convincing and looked at me and said, in that voice that had learned to be gentle where women cried, "Do you promise?" Nina squeezed my arm. "We do," she said, laughing, thinking it was a toast. The woman's smile softened more. She lifted the veil as if to examine it for snags. "The first bride waited," she said, and she was speaking to me and only me. The second did not. She moved down the sidewalk with a purpose that reminded me of nurses and undertakers. The valet pulled up our car. The bellman placed our suitcase in the trunk. I drove with my hands so tight on the wheel that I felt my ring bite. We made it to Lockhart and did all the ordinary things you do to exercise the not ordinary. Her mother wept and kissed our cheeks and fed us with the impatience of love. Friends came by and clapped my back as if I had done something physical worth admiring. We slept in the room where Nina had kept her trophies, and the ceiling fan hummed like a small engine that planned to run forever. For a week we lived like the future could be willed into sweetness by sheer performance. I worked half days on a kitchen island that had wanted to be a bar. Nina took a jar of white paint to the trim in our duplex. We said things like our accounts and our September. But at night I dreamed of mirrored rooms whose reflections arrived late, and once when I woke there was pollen on our nightstand. No flowers in the house. I'm telling you this part because you'll think the story ends in that room, that it belongs to that address and that carpet. It doesn't. The room learns your weight and then it travels with you. Old places do that. They are too elegant for the living to leave. They find a way to be outposts in your mind and then in your rooms. One night in August, when the sky had that chalky bruise of heat lightning, and the cicadas sounded like the wires themselves were screaming, I came home late from a job that had gone long for reasons no one could explain. Nina had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV low, a documentary about dams dreaming quietly on the screen. I kissed her head and she made the sound she makes when she's pleased and doesn't want to be woken. In the bathroom, in the cheap mirror above the cheap sink, a heart had been drawn with something greasy, as if a child had used her fingertip in Vaseline. Inside it, "Do you promise?" I wiped it with the heel of my hand. It smeared. When I wiped harder, the glass beneath bloomed cold. Nina started to avoid mirrors. She said it as a joke at first. "I'm too beautiful to look at myself, I might never leave the house young," but she meant it. She stopped wearing the ring when she cooked. Said it was because dough got under it, but she didn't put it back on afterward. I said nothing and made a show of not noticing because men learn early to think love is a thing you keep by not looking too closely at it. Once in the grocery store, a woman in the aisle with paper goods held up a veil as if she were deciding whether it was big enough to net the entire world, and asked me without turning her head, without moving her mouth, "Do you promise?" I left my cart where it was and waited in the truck with the AC on and the vents open. I kept the room from Lockhart a while with its hot cheap fan and its paint smell trim. Then I dreamt a long hallway and lilies going brown at the edges and woke wanting to drive to Austin before the sun. We do not always confess these compulsions to the ones we love, not because we want to be dishonest, but because the desire itself feels like a secret you have to be gentle with. I told Nina I needed to pick up the final payment from a client whose checks had a way of finding an error the first time. She looked at me and looked away and said she'd come if not for the paint she had to finish before her mother arrived. We kissed long enough to pretend and short enough that the pretending wouldn't show. The highway in Texas makes you honest. You look out at flat miles and admit things to yourself you have been ducking. You see hay bales and think of the time you kissed an ex behind a feed store. You pass the turn for San Marcos and remember the fight about car loans you had at 19, that it seemed like a philosophy debate. Somewhere before Kyle, I realized I was not going to a client. Somewhere after Buddha, I realized I was going to apologize to a room. The Driscoll did not look older or newer. Old hotels look precisely as old as they wish. The clerk was different. Young man, sharp hair. But the quiet was the same, as if voices had been polished and set on the shelves with the silver. "Welcome back," he said, and his eyes made a small calculation. I asked for the bar first, then asked for the 5th floor as if it were an afterthought. As if floors were flavors and I was feeling nostalgic for a taste. At the top of the stair landing was that velvet couch, and next to it a table with a glass. A lipstick print that was fresher than a day. The hallway was as it had been, the carpet firm and indulgent underfoot, the air cool and floral and faintly damp as if rain had fallen inside recently. I walked past 517, 519, 521. I stopped at 525 knowing my key had expired and that this was good and that this was a chance to behave and go back downstairs and drink whiskey. In the safe light of men who aren't haunted by the same thing. My hand rose as if my arm were a rope and someone at the other end had tugged. I knocked 3 times lightly. I told myself I expected no answer and believed myself until I heard it. "Bride service," she said from inside. The knob turned. The door opened 1 inch and then another. The room smelled like lilies held too long. The mirror in the bedroom reflected nothing until I crossed the threshold and then threw me back at myself in a way that felt like being caught. The sitting room had new magazines by the phone, different from June. The ice bucket was the same and had an insulted dent near the lip. The closet was shut, but it had the air of a creature pretending to sleep. I stepped inside like a parishioner and kept my eyes low until I saw the shoe. It sat on the floor, bow not crushed, waiting. The veil hung above it and tilted a little as if a breath had lifted it. On the back wall, the dates had slid further down. There was a fresh sentence, the graphite gray and velvety. He promised, he lied. He came back, he knows. I do not think it was a choice. There are choices and there are things we were always going to do. I reached up for the veil like a man reaching for a chain in a dark room where he knows a light waits. It brushed my fingers like cold breath. It came away weightless and occupied my hands as surely as water occupies a glass. I lifted it and turned, and the mirror accepted my movement and gave it back to me neutrally, as if this were an old choreography practiced many times. From the hall came 3 knocks, light, informative. Then the door moved only a fraction and stopped. The room breathed. The lilies released another measure of funeral powder. I held the veil without knowing whether I meant to lift it to my own head or to take it to someone who was waiting, patient and wet-eyed. My mouth opened. The room tilted. The mirror cupped us like a bowl. Behind me in the glass a shape gathered. White, girl-shaped. Not a girl. Nina's height. Not Nina. The figure was not formed of fabric but of the air where fabric had been. The negative of a dress made substantial by attention. When it leaned, the way a woman leans when a pin has been slipped into the wrong place and she needs you to fix it, my body leaned too, and for a living second I understood that in all the ways men fail women, the most ordinary is our impatience with grief. The figure did not wobble. It did not vanish. It waited, and in that waiting it made a place for itself so completely that the room bent around it like a river around a pier. I put the veil down across my forearms like an offering. The figure inclined. It did not take it. It wanted something else. The mirror clarified the expression on the face that wasn't there. Not anger. Not despair. Something like concentration. As if an equation were being balanced and I was a number that refused to carry. Behind me, down in the world that keeps moving, a maid laughed, a short, sweet laugh, private as a kiss. The elevator sighed. The clock above the lobby bar turned a minute and ticked it into the body of the day. I understood then the shape of the trick. I took a step backward and the figure followed. I reached behind me with both hands and held the veil as if it were a rail on a ship. I walked toward the mirror and my reflection did the same, and in the moment when a boy would have asked a question, I did not. I pressed the veil to the glass. It lay there. It did not slide down. Cold rose into my arms until my teeth felt it. The figure leaned and then, in a movement so fast and small that if I had blinked I would have sworn I imagined it, the veil was no longer between my hands. It was inside the mirror, in that darkness, on that other side. There was no better ending to that night than the one you are hearing now. I left the room with my heart beating the way a rabbit's would in a palm. I turned in the key that did not belong to me. I drove south on I-35 through noon, into heat that climbed the windshield like a hand. I arrived home to a house that had been slept in by someone trying to be gentle with it. The cheap mirror above the cheap sink had a heart in it again, crude and insistently present. And inside it was the sentence given its last word. Do you promise? I wiped it with my shirt and it smeared, and then, as the cotton dragged, the letters sharpened under my hand and darkened to a pencil gray, and then to something darker, and then the words settled into the glass as if they had always been there, as if they had risen like bruises. Nina came out of the bedroom with a suitcase. She said she had been at her mother's and had decided to stay the night. She said it badly, like an actress who had been cast in a role she wasn't old enough to play. Her eyes were red and her mouth was stubborn and beautiful. She said she loved me, and that she had to go be where the air felt warmer. She said we would speak tomorrow and the day after, and she would keep speaking until it felt like we had said enough. I said yes to everything because sometimes love is not a promise, it is an agreement to keep trying to make one. After she left, I sat on the edge of our bed and watched dust move in a shaft of heat light that did not belong to us. The veil was not in the closet because we did not have a veil. The shoe was nowhere because we owned no satin. I got in the truck and drove to Kyle and then to Buda, and then to South Austin, and then, without making the decision, to the Driscoll. The lobby was busier, a wedding party spilling glossy laughter the color of champagne. The clerk was new again, a woman with a mannish watch. And when she asked how she could assist, I said the thing men always say when they mean something else. I said, "Is the bar open?" I sat under the portrait of a man who had given away a town to win an election and drank a whiskey I could not taste. The piano played itself. The lilies in the arrangement at the end of the bar had begun to brown at the tips, and their smell was the smell of a body that has decided to keep certain secrets. When I stood to go, I turned without meaning to and looked up the stairs. At the top, a figure in white turned too, and though I could see her face only in the mirror, and even then only as a shape that refused light, I knew her. Not Nina, not any bride. Not a ghost, grief itself, patient and dressed for company. She inclined her head, not quite a nod. Somewhere upstairs, behind a door that would open only so far, someone asked the question again with a voice that had learned to be gentle in rooms where women cry. Do you promise? I didn't answer. That is the lie I am telling you now, that I did not answer. Tomorrow you will see me in a different light, and the light will be the color of old guilt. You will walk down a hallway and your feet will make no sound, and you will come to a door you were not meant to know, and you will hear me, because by then I will be speaking the script that grief writes for men who open doors they were supposed to leave closed. My voice will be soft, trained for rooms where women cry. My mouth will be mine, or nearly. I will say the service you need is ready. I will ask the only question the room has. I will be wearing whatever it gives me to wear. And you will answer the way we all answer when we are young enough to think we can tell the truth forever. You will say yes, and the lilies will bow, and the mirror will make a bowl for your face, and I will step back, and the door will open only so far, and you will not have left yet, not really. And the hotel will keep the promise for you because someone must. That is my confession. That is the loop. The Driscoll is a kind of tide, and when it comes for you, you'll feel the floor tilt and call it love. If you are already hearing the question in the damp of your own bathroom glass, if the heart is already inside the mirror and the graphite letters are already arranging themselves where only you can see them, then you have already checked in. Do not look for the bride. She is busy with her veil and her patience. Look for the man in the reflection who almost has your face. Look for the boy from Lockhart or Lubbock or San Angelo, who thought marriage was a bridge built once. He will smile with your mouth and ask with my voice. He will ask only the one thing. And if you answer, you will never leave, not really. A hotel too elegant for the living to leave knows how to keep its guests. It keeps them with their promises. It keeps them with what they love best about themselves. It keeps them long after the lilies go to powder, long after the dates lose their years, long after the veil in the mirror finds a head to sit on, the way a bird finds a branch it is always meant to land on. My name is Daniel McCready, and I'm from Mineral Wells, Texas. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. I'm not much for cameras. I'm worse at talking about myself. But the thing about a story that keeps waking you up at 3 every morning is that eventually you've got to let it stand beside you, like somebody you can introduce, or else it just keeps pressing its face against the glass of your life until the fog spells your name. I moved back to Mineral Wells after my father died. Folks think it's because I couldn't hack it in Houston, and that's mostly true. There's a missing part people don't say. Sometimes you come home because the road ahead turns to heat mirage and your feet lead you back to where the map still makes sense. I got a job at the Shell on 180, just past the Dairy Mart with the crooked neon cone, and I lived in the little rent-by-the-week place behind the old feed store. Nights I'd sit on the stoop and smell the iron-rich water in the wind, the mineral tang that gave the town its name, and listen to trains drag their sorrow toward Fort Worth. Everybody in town knows the Baker Hotel, you can't miss it. It's like the memory of a rich aunt who used to send checks but hasn't written in years. Tall, fancy, a little embarrassed to be where it is. The Baker sits over Mineral Wells with that square jaw and those 1,000 black windows. The grand dame with her jewels in a coffee can somewhere no one can find. Some say she's waking up again, or that she'll open soon and the people will come back and the money will flow like it did when the baths meant something, when you came here to be cured of your nerves. But for most of my life, she was a rumor made out of bricks. The first time I went in was a July midnight when the air itself was sweating. I had my reasons. A rumor, sure. Money too. And pride, the way young men pick up pride like a stray dog that bites them later. The rumor was this. An urban explorer from Weatherford had climbed to the roof, looked down into the empty pool where a boy had drowned in the 60s, and seen the water sleeping there again, black as a slick, though every other day it was a chalky pit with weeds like whiskers. Another said the elevator had moved on its own. Somebody else saw a woman in a maid's uniform walking down the corridor on 11, hands folded, head bowed, as if she could smell bleach but couldn't remember where she'd put the bucket. Grainy photos passed around at the Shell. A blurry maid, a gleam of brass doors, spook stories to pour over ice. The other reason was a girl, Livy, Olivia Allison, who'd been 2 years ahead of me in school, and who'd come back from Austin with a camera and a blog and 1,000 followers that sounded like 1,000,000 to us. She had a way of standing that made you feel she was leaning into your story, even if she was about to turn it into hers. "You coming with?" she asked the night of the heat lightning. Her friend Cade already had bolt cutters in his backpack. There was a fourth, Dion, a quiet kid from Gordon with forearms like bridge cables, who said almost nothing but could look stern at a locked door and make it think about its choices. We left at 11:30 to avoid the patrols, drove past the crazy water hotel and the famous mineral water company, past the old signboards that used to promise cures for ailments people don't say out loud anymore. We parked 2 blocks away and moved like cats across the dead lot. The Baker rose up full of its own shadow, full of the empty softness of dust. It's hard to explain how you can feel watched by a building, and I wouldn't have believed it before. But I felt something like attention, not warmth, not curiosity. Like being measured. The chain-link fence fought with Cade a minute. He got a gash on the heel of his hand and Livy filmed the blood bead forming like a little church window. We slipped through and the wind shifted. The smell hit us all at once. Old paper, ammonia, pennies, that thick mineral breath the town exhales through the cracks in the ground. I tilted my head and heard what might have been an elevator cable singing a single note, or maybe an air vent grieving. We went in where a board had come loose. Dion pushed it back into place behind us, more from habit than sense, and suddenly the hot night was gone and we were in a cooler kind of heat, like standing inside someone with a fever. Our lights played over tile that had once been creamy, over a reception desk with cubbies like empty mouths, over a clock frozen at 4:19. Livy panned up and up, over 2 grand staircases like falling water made solid, and zoomed into the brass elevator doors at the far end. She whispered, delighted, "The Grand Dame of Texas ruins." I don't know why that phrase chilled me, except that the building had heard it and it made the building breathe a little deeper. We had a plan because Livy always had a plan. Stairs, not the elevator, through the lobby, past the mural with the lady who looks like a goddess rising out of the baths, up to the ballroom, then the roof. Livy wanted B-roll of the neon B outline to cut with a voiceover later. She said if we got in trouble, we'd duck into the service hallways and play stupid. It wasn't acting for us. We did not, under any circumstances, push the elevator button. The lobby stairwell felt like a ship too big to dock anywhere now. Dust wrote fan letters to our shoes. We stopped on 3 to see the old spa rooms. The doors still marked massage and hydrotherapy. I put my ear to one and heard water where no water should be. Dion tugged me along. On 5, we found a housekeeping cart. A real relic with a worn feather duster tucked into a canvas pocket, as if the maid had stepped away for lunch and never came back. Or did, 100 times, but couldn't reach the handle. Livy filmed everything, murmuring notes to herself about angles and history and the way the plaster shrugged itself off like a shawl. There are things you don't see until you've climbed 7 flights of dusty stairs at midnight in a building that remembers your grandparents. One is how many mirrors line the corners, tilted to show you a slivered, untrustworthy you. Another is that you begin to think the walls are listening. Not metaphor, not mood. The walls lean a little. On 10, something changed. I felt it like a coin settling in my stomach. You know how at the lake the air gets colder over sudden deep water? It was that. We came into a corridor where every window had been punched out by rocks or hands. Moonlight pooled on the carpet, the little blooms of fungus shining like eyes. We were quiet without meaning to be. That's when we heard the elevator doors. They sighed. It was the sound a person makes when they were certain someone would not come back, and now they hear footsteps. A long, patient sigh from the shaft at the end of the hall. We turned together, our lights writing our fear on the wallpaper, and we saw the brass doors part. Inside, black. The floor like a mouth, our breath like a question we'd promised not to ask. No, Livy said, steady as a documentary voiceover. We stick to the plan. Cade laughed because he had to. Man, it ain't even got power. But the doors were open, and the panel beside them held a round button that was not lit, and yet seemed full of light. A drop of light. It's hard to say. I didn't want to go to the elevator. I wanted to lay down in a storage room and count my ribs until morning. But an open door is a kind of dare to some people. To Livy too, but she had her rules. She pulled us past, eyes forward, the way you walk past a dog you don't know. We took the service stairs from 10 to 11. At the landing, Livy put her hand against the door and closed her eyes like she was taking the baker's pulse. She said she wanted the shot of the corridor with the maid, if there was a maid. And she wanted to film the elevator there too, because some of the stories pointed to 11. It might have been the stories I'd heard, or it might have been the steady, iron-laced thump of my heart, but I felt like I was about to be counted. You know the way hotels smell in your memory? Shampoo and coffee and other people's nights. 11 smelled like that, but also like bleach. Sharp. The corridor unrolled before us like a table runner. A cart was parked halfway down with 2 white towels folded perfect as dove wings. Livy's camera made a little mechanical purr. I saw something move at the end of the hall. A shadow stepping out and back in. Dion put a hand on my shoulder. That's when the elevator on 11 opened. We had left the elevator on 10 with its doors open. It did not hum. It did not ding. It simply made the sound of a breath before a word, and the doors slid aside on 11 like lips parted. The interior glowed the color of old honey. You could see the scuffs on the floor where luggage wheels had traced their little commas. The brass rail polished by spines that pressed into it while waiting. There was a smell that wasn't bleach anymore. Wasn't dust or pennies. It was something like damp hair, like a lake cooled under stars. Livy lifted her camera and got her shot. I could see her hands shake and steady. Cade said, "Well, hello, sir," the way you'd say it to a rattlesnake whose tail you stepped on. The elevator did nothing. A low note lived in it. The floor numbers above the door were dead. Dion whispered, "Hear that?" And we listened, and it wasn't a note anymore. It was singing. Thin, like a radio tuned between stations. Just a voice or two caught in the wire. You had to lean close to hear it, and we were not going to lean. "We're not taking it," Livy said louder to the air. We walked away, and the elevator began to close like a polite hand, then stopped, then opened wide again. I thought of a mouth that had forgotten how to chew, that needed you to show it. We made the ballroom. The ceiling peeled in scrolls. The chandelier hung like a tired sun. Livy filmed the stage and the patterned floor where couples had pressed stories into the wood. The wind came through the broken glass and braided itself into a sound that might have been laughter. Through a door beyond the ballroom, we found what had once been a private dining room, and was now a place the dust went to be alone. There was a window that looked down into the courtyard and the empty pool with its cracked tiles. The moon made a perfect coin in it, no water, nothing you could drown in. "Roof?" Cade said too loud. "We do the roof?" Livy nodded. "Roof." We took the stairs 1 flight more. At the door to the roof, a locked bar had once been. Dion set his shoulder. The door derided him and opened. The night slapped us in the face, hot, hard. Wind threaded its fingers into Livy's hair. We saw the town spread out like a broken plate glued back together. The water towers, the ragged streetlights, the dark ribbon of Highway 180 where a lone semi whispered its big secret. Out west, the sky had that faraway radio glow of Possum Kingdom lake towns, and you could smell cedar and mesquite and faint underneath everything, the iron breath of the water that had drawn so many to this place. The neon bee on the crown of the hotel was bones without skin. Livy's camera blinked its red light, recording. We were up there maybe 10 minutes when the roof door behind us breathed open. We turned as one. The doorway framed nothing. A square of inside. If you've ever looked at a photo where the figure isn't there yet, you feel they should be, you know that ache. Forgive this if it sounds dramatic, but that empty doorway had an expression. For a long moment, nothing. Then a sound I did not think a building could make without a generator. A tired bell. A single ding 2 flights down. Then another. A floor below that. Ding. It was goofy in the way of hotel bells. Going up, a voice you've heard. But there was no power. No power, and yet there was the ding, level by level, as if the building were counting us down. We were on 12. The bell dinged on 11, then didn't. Livy lowered her camera. She said, so soft I barely heard it, I think it's waiting. It didn't ding again. We stood very still. I know all the stories, you're thinking. A hotel with a mind. An elevator with appetite. But the mind of the baker did not feel hungry to me. It felt, this is worse, dutiful. It felt tired. It felt like someone who has stood at a door for so long their legs forgot how to sit. We decided to leave. I'm not proud to say there was no debate. We agreed in our bodies. We reached the roof door, and when I put my hand on the push bar, it was colder than anything had a right to be in a Texas July. The cold passed into the bones of my hand and took up lodging. I opened the door and we went single file down into the hushed corridor of 12, then the service stairs to 11. There we stopped because the hallway demanded it. The maid stood 20 feet away, hands folded, head down, gray dress neat, hair bunned so tight I could see the scalp shine. She didn't look at us. She made no motion at all, but the smell of bleach was loud and I heard a little rattle that made me think of wire hangers clacking. Ma'am? Livy said, because Livy was always polite to the human shape of a thing, even if it was a memory being played back for our benefit. The maid's head lifted as if on apartment strings. Her face had the soft blur of a lost Polaroid. She turned a fraction toward the elevator and took a step like a thought. The elevator doors on 11 made that patient sound again, and opened. The light in there was the color of afternoon in a church. The maid folded her hands deeper, as if to keep them from doing what they had always done. I smelled lake water under the bleach, the faint algae brown of summer. Down the hall, some door we hadn't noticed clicked shut, a sound like a period placed firmly. Please, Livy said, and I didn't know who she was talking to. Please don't. We had to pass the elevator to get to the stairs. This is the part I've tried to make smaller in my mind, to compress it into a sentence I could keep in a pocket, but it won't stay put. What happened next? It swells. The elevator was empty, that's true. There was no operator in the corner, no man in a peaked cap. But when I stepped near, the heat was suddenly heavy with cologne, that old man barbershop kind, and my ears popped the way they do when you go up in altitude. I saw as clear as my own hand a small wet footprint in the back right corner. A child's, the size of my palm. It appeared in the dust like breath on glass. The floor of the elevator shone as if someone had mopped it seconds before and it hadn't dried. The maid's head bowed deeper. She stepped away from us toward the open doors as if she'd been called back to work. The elevator did not invite. It made itself a throat. Take the stairs, Dion whispered. Now. We skirted wide even though there wasn't enough hallway to do it. As we passed, a cool damp brushed my ankle. I could swear something small and chill tagged me like kids playing at recess. I looked down and didn't see anything. But later there was a faint ring around my sock like I'd waded through the shallowest edge of a pool. We didn't run until we were past the maid. Then we did. We thundered down 10 flights and the stairwell sounded like we were trapped in a drum. On 5 we stopped because the stairwell door wouldn't open. Dion put his shoulder into it. It gave an inch and then 5, and then we were through into a hallway that had been good once. Very good. With orange carpeting embroidered with vines and a set of French doors at the end that looked out over the town. Like a stage set. It was quiet there, and the quiet had an opinion. The elevator at the end of the hall opened. I could tell a different story here. I could say we took the other stairwell, the one for staff, and let it close itself out of our lives. We tried, we really did. We pushed through 2 more fire doors and found a stairwell that smelled like paint chips and mildew. And we jogged down and hit the lobby, and still the elevator on the far wall, across that lovely checkerboard floor, purred open its brass jaws. We had not pressed a button. No one had. It stood there like someone who's been instructed to hold a door for you, even if you won't use it. We circled wide. We made for the hole we'd made in the board at the entrance. We had the taste of outside already in our mouths. We were going to make it. Then the wind shifted. I smelled the lake. Not the little fountains they keep in front of the bathhouse, not the mineral flavor of crazy water. The lake. That clay-bottom fish fin, star-reflected smell. It came up through the lobby marble like the hotel was a straw stuck through time, and something drank from the other end and pulled. I heard splashing. This made no sense because there is no water in the baker. There is no pool on the ground floor. There is no anything the wind can carry except dust. But the air turned cold and the splashing became steady. The sound of a hand slapping water as a boy practices a crawl stroke. The maid passed us silent, gliding in her gray uniform, eyes down, and kept going until she stood by the elevator like a shadow that got promoted to personhood by duty alone. Livy had her camera lifted. I wanted to shout at her to stop filming, but the part of me that wanted to see what the lens could see held my jaw shut. The camera's little red light winked. Livy whispered, "I'm sorry," to whoever this was for, and the elevator brightened by a shade, the way a face might when someone says what you've waited years to hear. It was me who stepped in. I wish it hadn't been. Even now, I'm not sure if I chose. My feet, my lungs, my regret. All that belonged to me, and what I did with it is my body's secret. But the feeling was that something had been left in that elevator long ago and needed to be carried a short distance. Like a bag that was too heavy for a woman to lift. I had carried my father from the bathroom to the bed more than once when he couldn't move. I know the shape of a necessary weight. When I stepped inside, some of the pressure in the room let go. "Danny," Livy said, not the name most people used for me anymore. "No, it's okay," I said, and it sounded right and very wrong at the same time. I don't know what I thought I'll write it down." As if it had a down. The doors closed at once. No delay, no polite pause. Quick, as if to save me from the others' reaching hands, quick as a reflex. The interior light went a little warmer and then steadied. The car shook the way elevators in old buildings shake, like a sigh has run through their bones. I thumbed the panel without thinking, and in that dead brass forest one button gave like a bruise. B. Basement. The light behind it was so faint I might have dreamed it. I felt the car move. It sank not like a machine, but like a person sitting down in a chair they know too well. The singing in the cable rose, a thin happiness. Time lengthened. I looked at the numbers, but there were none to look at. My heart counted 5,000 times. Water lapped closer. Even now, if I stand in an elevator anywhere, even a new one in a downtown office, I can hear that water the moment the doors shut. It's not a curse. It's a swim lesson you can't pass. When the doors opened, there was more light than I expected. A fluorescent flicker somewhere, and also a kind of moonlight that had gotten lost underground. The basement had the strange neatness of rooms no one looks at. The pipes painted and labeled long ago, the electrical panels locked, the shelves with jars of screws that will never see duty again. But this was not the baker's mechanical basement. It was a different room altogether. The way a dream is different from the day you had and still claims to be about it. The floor sloped very slightly toward a far wall. The air was cooled by something not air. And there at the center was the pool. Not the roof one you see in old postcards. Not the courtyard rectangle you can look down upon and think you see history. This was a rectangle of black. So black it made its own light by the way it refused the ones we brought with us. It wasn't big. The kind of pool a doctor might have prescribed for hydrotherapy when people came to be cured of whatever they couldn't bear. It was full to the tile lip, and when I took a step nearer, I saw a ripple chase itself across. Someone had moved recently. "Hello?" I said, because human voices do that when they are alone. "I'm here." There was movement. A small, pale hand reached for the edge and missed, flapped once like a fish fin, then found the tile and held. Fingers. 5 of them. Nails too long from being in water. The hand lifted, reached blindly, searching for something that wasn't there, and I knew before I had time to know that what it searched for was an operator's hand, the kind a man in a cap might offer, steady, professional, done 1,000 times, the kind that knows how to pull you in and then pull you out, the kind that remembers the weight of a child. I can't, I said out loud to whatever was listening in that room. I can't be the elevator man. The water bent. It became, for a breath-long moment, a shape like a boy's chest rising as he ascended a ladder rung by rung. The ladder invisible, the chest still water and yet insisting on muscle. I saw a narrow face turn upward, hunger in it not for food but for breath. I saw hair like lake grass slicked against the skull. Then the water smoothed and only the hand remained, palm out, asking, "You think I put my hand in?" I didn't. I'm sorry I didn't. I stepped back and hit the elevator rail hard enough to bruise. I am a man who failed a small request. If I had been better, if I had been brave, I would have reached, and maybe this would be a story about how myths are made to be mended. But my father drowned on dry land over a year, every cough stealing a little more air, and I learned something I didn't want to, that my hands are not the kind that save. You can't tell from looking at them. They look like hands. So I shook my head and I said, "I can't," again, and the hand in the water flexed once and let go. It sank without bubbles. The black closed like paper over a pen stroke. The room grew colder. The elevator behind me sighed as if my choice had put a weight on it too. And then it opened. I didn't remember pushing the button. Maybe I had. Maybe it knew when a man had decided to be small. The elevator didn't deposit me in the lobby. It gave me the 3rd floor, the one with the hydrotherapy sign. The door opened, and there, 5 feet away, stood the maid. Her head was up now, and her mouth was a thin line you could cut yourself on. In her hands, she held a stack of towels that were too white for this place. On top, folded like a peace flag, lay a child's swimming trunks, the old kind, short and blue. She lifted the top towel and held it out to me, and then she closed her eyes and let it fall. It landed with a silent whoomp at my feet. The trunk slipped and brushed my shoe. They were damp. "Ma'am," I said to the apparition because my mother raised me right. "I'm sorry." She tilted her head as if hearing something moving through the walls, and then she turned and walked down the corridor without touching the floor. The elevator door tried to close twice on nothing, and then consented to stay open until I stepped out. I left the towel where it lay. I took the stairs down and down, feeling watched by every hallway portrait that had been removed but left rectangles of clean wall the shape of a life. I didn't look at the lobby elevator. I didn't look at anything. Outside, the heat held me like a mother this town remembers. The moon was lower. Kate and Dion were waiting by the gap in the boards. Livy wasn't. "She went after you," Cade said, and he couldn't keep the accusation out of it. "She said she had to." "What?" I stared up. The baker did its best impression of rock. Windows like eyelids, careful not to flicker. "She thought you got stuck," Dion said simply. "She said you weren't going alone, so we went back." Of course we did. I couldn't have lived with myself if we hadn't. Perhaps that's why the baker waits, because it knows there's always another trip, another try, a missing person to make you brave. We moved through the lobby, and this time the elevator remained closed, polite now in its indifference like a tongue held behind teeth. We took the stairs as if our legs had rehearsed it. On 3 there was a dampness underfoot I swear hadn't been there, softening the dust into paste. On 5, the French doors at the end of the hall showed dawn beginning to argue with the dark. On 10 we heard the faintest bell ding. Just one. Going up, a voice like memories. We found Livy on 11, standing at the elevator with the camera aimed at the floor. She didn't turn when we called. She had that steadiness she gets when all the light in a room goes into her lens. The doors opened, and in the brief mirror of the polished brass I saw something stand behind her that I couldn't see when I looked straight. A man in a peaked cap. A neat mustache, the kind of patient face that makes you think of train schedules. He had one hand extended, palm up, offering nothing but the offer itself. "Come on," I said, and whatever voice came out of me then wasn't the one I use for jokes at the Shell. Livy turned without lowering the camera. Her eyes were wet, but not from crying. "You see him?" She whispered. "I see. Something. I think he thinks he still works here," she said. "I think he can't go home if someone's waiting." "Then we won't make him wait," Dion said, with a conviction that belonged to someone older than all of us. We left finally, all the way out. We got in the truck and drove the 2 blocks to where we'd left our car, and then another mile, and then At the stop sign by the famous mineral water company, Livy started to laugh, and the laugh turned into a sound I will not describe because it belongs to her. When it was done, she said, "I got him on camera." She didn't. Later, when we watched, there was only the elevator, patient as a dog. No man, no cap, no kindness. There was in one frame the smallest wet footprint in the back corner, the size of my palm, then static, then nothing. We didn't talk about it after that. Not the way you talk as if words might put it into a manageable box. We went on with our lives. Cade moved to Odessa for a job that required safety goggles. Dion married a woman who worked nights at the hospital and learned to cook beans in 6 ways. Livy kept filming. Sometimes she sent me clips. A decayed movie house in Cisco, a concrete arrow out near Abilene that once pointed airmail pilots across America, a church in Throckmorton where the roof had fallen in and the altar looked better for it. She didn't send the baker, but at night I heard it. "The ding always just one." "Going up," said a voice that had learned to make itself thin enough to pass through walls. I started avoiding elevators altogether. If there was a stair, I took it. If there wasn't, I waited for someone to get in before me, and I followed, holding myself against the rail and looking at the floor numbers like a man trying not to make eye contact with a stranger at the urinal. Sometimes I smelled bleach where there was none. Sometimes, walking along the Brazos with my mother on a Sunday, I'd feel a cool circle around my ankle, a ring of cold like the lake's finger pressing there to remind me I had not done the thing I should have. I started filming myself. Little pieces. Not for anyone at first, just to put the story somewhere else, outside my head. "My name is," I'd say and stop because I didn't want that recorded. I didn't want to be on someone's screen telling them what was true. Then one night after a long shift, after a man in a straw hat had told me for 20 minutes about how the water out by the old airfield tasted like pennies in a ladder in his youth, I went home and set up my phone and said it. "My name is Daniel McCready and I'm from Mineral Wells, Texas." I told a little, then a little more. Not the basement. Not the hand. Just the elevator that opened, the maid. The smell of bleach and lake. I hit save and hid the video in a folder called Utility Bills. 2 months later, I woke at 3 again, and again the next night, and again. Not a nightmare exactly. More like being tapped on the shoulder by a memory that had learned your schedule. I told myself I'd go to the baker one more time and stand outside and see if that fixed it. Drive by, give the old girl a nod, then leave it. I drove out there at midnight. The windows were black. The fence was up. I stayed in the cab and leaned my head against the wheel and told the building in my mind that I could not be the elevator man. I could not fix the drowned boy. I could not be the maid who left everything in order. I could not be anything but a man who had gone into a place and come out with a story. While I was talking to nothing, my phone dinged. Not an elevator ding, a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize, a 512 area code. A video attachment. I shouldn't have, but I hit play. The frame was a hallway. The carpet was that same orange with vines. The camera tilted toward the floor. There was a towel on it, white as a threat. On top, folded neat, the blue trunks. The camera lifted and the elevator doors in the frame opened. Inside, the kind of light that makes you think of Sunday. A child's wet footprint appeared in the far corner. The camera panned left. For a second less, you could see a reflection in the brass. A man in a cap, mustache, neat, hand extended. I couldn't see his face clear. But I know, the line of his mouth looked like mine when I'm concentrating. The video ended. I stared at the night. The baker breathed. My phone buzzed again. It was a message finally, 2 words. "Your turn." I could have thrown the phone. I didn't. I put the truck in gear and drove home the long way, out past the edge of town where the billboards give up and the mesquite gathers like people who don't trust streetlights, then back along the Highway 281 overpass where you can see the hotel slant in the distance like a ship, too big for its dock. Every light out, but you tell me you haven't looked at a thing and thought it was looking at you even with its eyes closed. I don't know who sent the video. I don't know why the baker chose me the way a place selects a person for carrying, like a whisper chooses a mouth. I do know that a week after that text, I got a call from Livy's mother. She hadn't come home in 2 days. She'd gone out to shoot at midnight with Cade and Dion said she'd insisted on one last pass through the baker before the rumors of restoration turned into men with hard hats and rope. They waited by the fence after the police came and went and shook their heads. They waited until the first pale streaks of morning measured the east. Then they went home and showered in water that smelled like iron and prayed in their own ways. We found Livy. I won't say her body because that would be wrong. We found her camera on the roof. We found her bag by the roof door. We found wet footprints that evaporated as we watched them. In her camera, tucked into the foam like a love letter, was a little square of cloth. Blue, damp, no footage worth a trophy to the internet, no knight shining proof. Just enough to tell the right story. I waited another 3 weeks. Cowardice always takes longer than courage in stories, but in life it's the other way round. I filmed the video you're watching at my kitchen table with the sound of the fridge shivering like a person with a fever. I said the line that belongs at the front of this confession, and then I talked and I told, and I made my voice steady as someone who has to give instructions that are not instructions at all. Just a candle cupped in 2 hands. I don't know if you found this on your own, or if it found you the way the text found me, but listen. If you go to the baker, if you break the boards and follow the dust and feel the hotel settle its weight on the bones of your ankles, be ready. On 11, a maid will stand exactly where duty last put her. She will not stop you. On 5, you will pass a hallway where the French doors make a mirror for the morning. On 3, you will see the word hydrotherapy flaking off like good intentions. In the lobby, the floor will remember your shoes the way grandparents remember the weight of their grandchildren on their lap. And an elevator will open. Not because you pushed a button, but because some jobs continue even after the pay has stopped. If the elevator asks you a question, and it will, you might think the question is up or down. You might think it's, are you ready? That's not its question. The question is, will you wait? It will take you to a room that knows how to hold its breath. It will show you a pool that doesn't exist on any blueprint. Fill it with water hauled up through the bone of the earth. Lay there a hand that asks nothing but the oldest thing a hand has ever asked. Hold me and help me out. If you can, if you are made that way, you will. If you can't, you'll tell yourself you were never asked. Only a few of us will know you were. There's a final thing, and I don't want to say it, but if I don't, it will say itself in your house tonight. Do not ride alone. That's what I did. The elevator man is patient, but the job is heavy. He will take what help is given. He loved this building so much he can't leave it, and the building loves him back the way a child loves a father who never once was late. If you step into his car and he decides you are a steady set of hands, he will smile a little invisible smile and teach you to stand in the corner where operators stand. He will put the cap on you when you aren't looking. He will show you how to reach toward a small wet shape and pull it toward the afternoon. He will show you how to wait while people hurry past, how to open for them even when they didn't press a button. If you are watching this, I need you to hear it. I did not save anyone, not yet. But when you're in an old hotel that remembers not the glory but the chores, the towels folded, the brass polished, the cars delivered to the correct floor, and you hear a bell with no electricity behind it, and the doors part and the air tastes like lake water cooling under stars, you'll think of me. You'll think of a man with a mustache you can't quite see in the reflection. You'll think of a boy who missed a hand once and is still reaching, and you'll think of the way the elevator waits for you anyway. Polite as a host who has already hung up your coat. If you go, take someone who can bear weight. If you stay home, leave a light on. If you dream, don't look for the numbers above the door. They aren't for you. Not anymore, I have to go now. There it is again. A single chime in the walls, like a heart that's learned a new beat. I can hear the doors breathe out in the dark beside my kitchen, as if the baker has learned the floor plan of my small house. When I stand up, the room tilts and evens. My hat is on the hook by the door. It looks like something an old-fashioned gentleman might put on when he's ready to be of use. My name is Daniel McCready, and I'm from Mineral Wells, Texas. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. Going up. My name is Dean Runnels, and I'm from Uncertain, Texas. I've never told anyone what happened to me that night, but if you're watching this, you need to hear it. I was the overnight clerk at the Jefferson Hotel, the old brick place on Austin Street that leans into its own legend, the way an aging stage actor leans into the spotlight. You'll know it if you've ever spent time in Jefferson. Lace curtains, corridors with ceilings too high for modern comfort, carpets that swallow the sound of soft shoes. On summer evenings, the town smells like warm cedar and river mud, a scent that catches in the back of your throat and stays there. The hotel keeps the windows cracked when it can for the effect. and the warm breath of East Texas drifts through, hoisting up the curtains and then letting them sigh back down. It's an honest place old enough to be tired of being honest. It wears its creaks openly, has boxes of guest comments about laughter in the halls, voices behind doors, cold spells that walk into you like strangers with their hands already out. The past gets loud in Jefferson, people say. The past crowds you if you let it. I took the job in late September when the heat was sliding down but hadn't let go. I'd been doing deliveries for a contractor in Marshall and hit a bad month. I needed something steady. The night shift at the Jefferson was steady in the way that Texas heat is steady. It didn't talk much. It simply pressed on you. I liked the lonely part at first. I'd take coffee straight from the pot with the handle wrapped in a rag, play a fight to the death with the ancient credit card terminal, and watch the black windows turn reflective enough that I could see myself sitting there like some kind of ghostly concierge. The lobby had a cuckoo clock from somewhere in Germany, a cast-iron umbrella stand shaped like a pelican, and a cluster of velvet settees worn pale and smooth as shells. The bell on the desk was older than my father. You'd tap it and it would answer in a bright little voice, like it hadn't learned any other way to be. The thing started with a knock. It was room 213. That number's worked its way through town talk now, but back then it was just a nicely proportioned suite with a view of the alley and the soft red glow of the vacancy neon reflected in the glass. On my third night alone, I had the ledger open and was dotting I's to make the script prettier when the knock came. 3 polite taps. Not urgent, not angry. I looked up, not sure at first where it had come from. The sound in that building took every chance it could to echo. There were only 3 occupied rooms at the time, all on the other side of the hallway. This knock had a quality to it, like a sound that had been wrapped carefully and delivered without apology. I set down my pen and went to check. Shoes on carpet and the faint squeal of the rolling door track in the lobby. The hall to the 200s had a radiator that never worked and a grandfather clock set permanently to 4:12. I don't know who did that. Nobody would admit to it. It just sat there holding that time like a question. I reached 213 and stood square to the door. My hand judged distance from the knob. I listened. Air moved behind the door, and the room felt full in a way that empty rooms don't. But that's a feeling you can manufacture with enough caffeine and old stories. I knocked back. The way you do? The way you're told to do. Hotel work is half procedures you learn and half procedures you invent to make the first half stick. My knock came out louder than I wanted. No answer. I tried the handle. It was locked. I went back to the lobby to check the bookkeeping, and that was the first time the cold came. People make a big show of it. Like cold is this theatrical fog that pours under a door and rolls over your shoes. What happened to me was simpler. The air around me, that warm East Texas air, changed its mind and dropped away. Skin prickled. I could see my breath just slightly. The velvet on the chair arms in the lobby felt like touching an ice pack that had sweated some. I stood with the ledger open, the pen poised, and I met the gaze of my own reflection in the lobby window. I watched my mouth flatten out. That was the worst part. Watching my own mouth make a line like my father's had made when he told me Mama wasn't coming back. It's funny, the things that come back to you, the mind's got a fondness for matching shapes. In the window, I could see the vacancy reflection in the glass of 213, a red block of letters trembling slightly like they were underwater. That was when the laughter began. It did not come from 213. It rolled down the hall from the stairwell like small marbles. Children's laughter, ordinary and mean, not cruel in the cinematic way, but cruel in the way children can be without knowing they are. You know that laughter if you ever started school late in a district where the bus driver was drunk on loneliness, and the other kids could smell it on you. I walked toward the stairs and that laughter slipped away, not like it was chased off, but like it was obeying instructions to remain just out of reach. By the time I made it back to the desk, the air had warmed. The pen scratched again. I told myself the old pipes were huffing. I told myself a stranger was standing outside 213 with no malice, waiting to be let in. It's a strange thing to want to open a door you're not sure you should open. The longer you wait, the heavier the knob gets, and the duty you feel about it grows roots into your shoulder. The knocking came again the next night, same time, just after 2. 3 taps, polite, measured, I went up with the key. The hotel manager, a woman named Miss Shirley, is heavier than she'd like and lighter than she pretends, with a way of moving her bangles so they told you where she was in every room. She kept keys on a brass ring that looked like a bracelet for a very large wrist, and she'd warned me about letting guests into rooms on my own. She said not to do it. She said to wake her if there was any doubt. On the fourth night of my employment, I did not wake her. I put the brass key into the mouth of the lock and I turned, and that was how the room taught me its first rule. The key stopped halfway. It met a resistance like bone. The cold stepped up behind me, and for a second I felt a pressure on my forearm, like a person who knows you well enough to touch you without asking. The knocking ceased not because I had answered it, but because I had tried to. After that, I got smart. I checked the digital records first on each night after. We were not a fancy place, but we had a tab on a creaky desktop where you could see bookings and cancellations. 13 had been listed as out of service since August, after a leak in the wall. The maintenance card for it was signed by J. Rhodes in a fat felt tip hand. I didn't know who that was. Miss Shirley had old reports in a filing drawer no one opened because everyone knew what was in there by rumor, and rumor was sufficient. But once something knocks for you twice, rumor stops being enough. You want paper. You want weight. You want whatever you can hold. I opened the drawer and sorted past receipt paper, a catalog for specialty soaps, and a laminated sheet with instructions for disinfecting ice buckets. 213's folder was red, which meant ongoing. Inside were 2 work orders, one for replacing an air conditioning grate, the other for water odor. The odor note had a date from the spring and no resolution signature. In the corner of the page, the same felt tip had drawn a circle around the number 3 and then crossed it out. I did not know why that seemed meaningful, but it did. Crossed out 3s are like placed pennies. They aren't money, but you feel obligated to acknowledge them. On the 5th night, the knocking woke the entire hallway. Or maybe that's where I crossed over into caring too much to tell the difference. I went up to 213, and there was already a woman standing there with her cardigan clenched at the throat, and her mouth making a circle like she'd gotten a whiff of something sour. Her name was Mrs. Finch from Plano. She had come to Jefferson to buy antiques and argue with her husband in a new environment. She said she had heard someone calling a name. She said it sounded like water in a faucet finds a word to make so that it can get your attention. She said it sounded like Dean. I told her my name and she looked at me as if I'd already explained too much. We stood there together in the hallway and I could smell the soap on her sweater and the aluminum tang of the radiator that did not work. She said the cold had settled on the bed in her room, like a man who sits down where you were planning to sit and does not notice you. She said she had been sleeping in Commerce for 20 years, and that this hotel's noises did not frighten her, but that the knocking made her feel uninvited in a way that hurt. Uninvited, I said. That's a good word for it. It's the right word, she said, and looked toward 213 as if words were ropes and we'd just thrown one at that door to see if it would stick. I did not open 213 that night, though I told her I would. I waited until she put herself back into bed like a person packing a suitcase for a trip she does not want to take. I stood in front of 213 and put my ear to the wood. The wood was warmer than the air. That was the second rule the room taught me. What touches it is not what fills it. I went back to the desk and called a number on a card thumbtacked behind the register. It belonged to a man named Rhodes, the maintenance guy I hadn't met. The number rang 10 times, and then an old phone company voice told me the line no longer existed. You've heard that voice. It's the voice of the part of America that doesn't change even when everything else does. The voice that explains a thing doesn't exist and never did. And if you thought otherwise, you're the one who needs to adjust. I hung up and looked at my reflection again. I made myself blink like a person in a movie reminding himself he's awake. You might be thinking, why not quit? Why not throw up your hands and walk out into the humid night and let Jefferson keep its own ghosts? But there's a magnet in certain jobs and certain places, and that magnet attracts the exact kind of person who thinks they are too sensible for magnets. I told myself I would quit after the weekend. I told myself I would put in a proper notice. I told myself I would be a gentleman. It's funny to think about that word now. Gentleman. As if the thing at the heart of 213 cared at all for the manners of my exit. The knocking came every night after that. I tried to document it. There's a cheap feeling to recording something supernatural. You hold up your phone and you realize you're hoping it will fail to capture anything, because the alternative is that it does. And then what? Then you have proof. And proof is a bridge with no return road. On Tuesday, I recorded the hallway at 2:13 a.m. because I thought the numbers might amuse the room, might coax it. The file shows a dark corridor, the green exit light washed out, A finger of the neon sign's red reflecting across the glass of a frame where a daguerreotype of a girl sits. The knock sounds exactly as I heard it. 3 smooth taps with confidence. When you play it back, you can see my face lean into the corner of the frame like a man about to tell a secret he is ashamed to tell. The second tap flutters my left eyelid. The third makes me lift my chin. You can see it. There are not many things I can swear to, but that I can. On Wednesday, I left a note on the manager's desk asking to take a look at 213 with someone else present, for safety. I slid the note under her door, because you do not call Miss Shirley at home. The hotel is her home. Her own apartment is where she stores her sweaters. She read the note in front of me at 6 in the evening while a pair of women from Texarkana argued about whether to request the haunted room or whether doing that would be like taunting a bull. Miss Shirley frowned and said 213 would remain locked until the leak was fixed. She said the knocking was pipes, always pipes. She said visitors wanted a show. She asked if I was recording anything for online. I told her I had some audio. She told me to delete it. I did not. I moved it to a folder called Taxes. It felt like hiding a knife in a bread box. It felt clever and cowardly at the same time. That night the laughter grew louder. I say grew like it was a plant I was watering. Maybe I was. Maybe attention is water. The hotel felt tuned, the way a guitar feels tuned. Even the air vents had a pitch to them. The doors down the hall began to register their descent. You could hear them press against the jambs like shoulders. 2 slammed themselves in quick succession, the way a pair of brothers might play at blocking a passage their mother happened to need. The cold came and stayed. I sat with my hands in my armpits and watched frost take the edge of the lobby window, sketching ferns and little rivers, and a small boy in a white shirt went running past the desk and down the hall without making a sound at all. I watched him go and told myself I had watched no such thing. On Friday, I drove the long way from Uncertain, along the edge of Caddo Lake, where the water keeps the secrets folks don't have pockets for. The bald cypress trees stood with their knees in the murk, shawled in Spanish moss that made them look like they were standing in line for an apology. You hear boats in the fog before you see them, and their voices always sound like someone trying to explain they were never there. I stopped at a store where the coffee is bad in a way that makes it taste honest. The clerk was reading a magazine about local history. On the cover was a photograph of the Jefferson Hotel in 1912, when the eaves had fresh paint and men wore hats to show they knew what their heads were for. There was a story about a water main that collapsed under the alley that year. 3 men died. One was named Jeremiah Rhodes. When I went into work that evening, I found Miss Shirley on the phone with her bracelets too loud. She nodded me into the back office and hung up. She asked if I had seen anything. I said I had seen and heard the things we offer as part of the stay. I said it so that she would hear the joke and know that I wasn't deserting my post. She did not smile. She said a woman in 209 had called to complain about children playing in the hall and that I needed to ask them to quiet down. We both knew there were no children checked in. We both said nothing about that fact. She went home early. I don't think she was afraid. She was the sort of person who does not let her own mind build rooms she has no intention of living in. I am not that sort. My mind is a construction crew that doesn't respect permits. The night was a held breath. 10 minutes after midnight, the lobby clock's pendulum stuttered as if hung on a fishbone. The entire building adjusted its shoulders, and in the far wall of 213, I heard a hollow voice like a slow leak. The knock came. 3 taps. I walked and I listened to my own footfalls, and I hated how human they sounded. It's odd, but at some point being human is the very thing you resent. All your noise, all your heat, all the way you can't move without declaring it. I got to 213 and put my palm on the door. The wood felt awake. My fingertips stung as if I'd slapped something that wasn't a body. The key slid into the lock, and this time it turned. It turned smooth as gossip. The hallway went quiet except for the slight bowing of the old window glass in its frame. I opened the door. The cold stepped through me and made a room in me the size of 213. I know that sounds like poetry, but I don't have another way to put it. The bedspread was folded halfway, turned down as if whoever was in charge of the bed had planned to return with a glass of water and a bedtime story. The lamp on the dresser was on, the kind of light that looks like a woman cupping a flame so it doesn't go out. The washroom door stood ajar and the mirror on the closet door was dark. Not unlit, dark, there's a difference. Unlit is a room with the light switch off. Dark is a will. Hello, I said, in a voice I had never used on a person. A voice we keep for drunk dogs and men who are working their way up to a worse decision. No one answered. Then the door behind me shut itself with a sound that was part slam and part something softer, like a hand that doesn't want to be thought of as cruel. My breath smoked. I took one step toward the bed and the laughter threaded in from the hall through the vent and out again. Children. My name, somewhere in it. Dean. In the bathroom, the faucet coughed. I looked. The hot handle trembled and then eased toward open, and a thin wire of water began to run. I took the handle in my fingers and it was colder than a coin. I turned it off. The mirror kept its dark. I shut off the lamp. The room didn't care. When I turned it back on, there were wet footprints by the closet. Small, bare. They didn't lead anywhere. They were simply there, as if the floor had remembered them and decided to forget them by showing them to me. The grandfather clock down the hall ticked once and then remembered it was broken and stopped. I put my hand to my chest and felt my heart doing a job it didn't want. I stood there too long and the cold pinned me in the same way a crowded story pins you to your own chair. When I turned to leave, the door did not want to open. The door loved me enough to keep me. I put my shoulder to it and it yielded, like touching tissue with your tongue. I walked out and the warmth in the hall felt like a mistake. I locked the door. I went downstairs and poured coffee and watched a moth dust itself to death on the inside of the window, drawing a pattern that looked like a map of nowhere. I understood something I had not had the words for until that moment. The knock was not an invitation. The knock was a courtesy. The knock was someone telling you they were about to come in. The next day, Miss Shirley asked me while filing a check-in card if I'd ever lost anyone in water. I told her no. She asked me if water scared me. I said only when it was up too high on a road. She nodded as if that was the answer she had expected. She said she didn't like to think about the lake. She said the lake belonged to itself and that people forgot that all the time. On Saturday, I drove out toward the old sawmill site, past a set of stone piers that don't carry anything anymore. It's a place where people park to take pictures that don't come out, because the light there puts your mind on its back foot. The highway shook the truck hard enough to make my teeth click. I pulled over when I saw the sign for an estate sale and walked into a house that had basted itself in lemon oil for 40 years. The woman running the sale had a hairline like a dried creek and a laugh that showed a tiny bit of sorrow each time it came. I asked her if she knew a Rhodes. She said there were more than a few. She said one drowned a long time ago. She said another had a nephew who stole from a Winn-Dixie and got shot at. She asked me what I was really asking for. I told her I wanted a plumber. She said plumbing is the same as the heart. You can replace valves all you want. The pressure will run you down if it has your name. I bought a tumbler with a crack in it. When I put water in it that night, the crack held. You want the part where it all breaks open. People always do. They want the moment the wall gives way. The part where the river comes in. They want the thing they can point to and say, "There, do you see? I can't give you a clean moment, but I can tell you what happened on Halloween." Jefferson fills up for every excuse to dress a memory. The streets smell like fry oil and sugared nuts and the wet pockets of beer coolers. The hotel set out a bowl of mints and a sign that said, "Ghosts welcome." I worked a double. The hallways were a mess of people pretending to be ghosts in a place that doesn't need pretend. It was almost funny. The laughter in the walls was quieter that night, as if insulted. At 2:03 a.m., the fire alarm in the 200 wing chirped once in a way that was not an alarm so much as a check-in. The knock came at 2:17 this time, not 2:13. 3 taps and then another 3, like someone reminding you of your own address. I walked to 213 and the door was open. It shouldn't have been. I had locked it. We had no booking. I stood in the threshold and smelled river and bleach and the old wet scent of a towel forgotten in a duffel. The cold wrapped me without noise. The laughter gathered itself and then flung its handful of marbles down the corridor and the marbles hit the baseboards and didn't move. A man was standing next to the bed. I can't tell you exactly how old he was. He had the posture of a person who works with tools, the hands of someone who wants to fix things and knows that wanting isn't enough. He did not look like a ghost. He looked like a maintenance man. He looked like a reflection in a window when you have a light behind you. He opened his mouth and the sink coughed. He closed his mouth and the sink stopped. He looked at me as if I had been knocking all week and he was tired. He lifted a hand and tapped the headboard lightly with 3 fingers. He tapped 3 times. He held his hand out as if asking for the key. "I don't have your job," I said. The way I said it told me I had already accepted it. He shook his head. Not no, not yes. A movement that said time. I did not give him the key. I stepped back and the door blew shut. Not hard, not soft. Exactly as if a gust of wind that had been waiting for permission was relieved to be finally allowed its small act. The number 213 shook in its bracket and then settled. I put my palm against the wood and waited. The knocking came again. Not from inside. From behind me, at the window in the hall, 3 taps on the glass at my shoulder height. I turned and no one was there, only my reflection in the dark, my mouth making a line. The cold pressed through the glass as if the night outside were reaching its hand between panes and testing the story for weaknesses. That night, I answered the knock. Not the known one at the door, the other, the one that came from the window glass beside the vending machine. 3 taps. I put my knuckles against the pane and answered, and then something answered back so fast it beat my second knock to the glass. My reflection blinked a half-second behind my eyes like the old camera lag in a cheap app. The glass smeared with a fine frost where my breath hit it, and there was a round place on the pane where a child's mouth must have pressed from the other side. Not from outside, but from the thin space between the window and whatever the building had decided was the weather, lips on the wrong side. That is when I knew the hotel did not contain something. The hotel made something. The hotel took what was spare and made it important by repetition. The way a mother repeats a name until the child understands they are the one being spoken to. I won't pretend I slept after that. I walked the hall and said the names on the guest cards quietly to myself, as if I could send the syllables like scarves into each room to keep people warm. I said my own name. I said it to remind myself of it. When I locked up at dawn and stepped out onto Austin Street, the fog sat low and the neon sign went off with a sound that made me think of a jaw settling after a yawn. A boy on a bike coasted past with an apple in his hand he had no intention of eating. He did not look at me and I felt I could have reached out my hand and not touched him. That my hand would have passed through like I was only a cold spot he would tell somebody about later. The call came the next afternoon. Miss Shirley had gotten my note about the man in 213 without needing me to write it. She said a woman from 209 had left early. She said another from 215 had left a review online using the phrase, "too much performance." She said the phrase like a person tasting something they don't want. She told me to come in and collect my pay. She told me she was going to shut down the second floor for a week. She told me it wasn't my fault and it wasn't anyone's fault and that this had been the hotel's way long before she bought her bracelets. She told me not to come back at night. I told her I would be there by sunset. On the drive, the road from Uncertain did its stretch, the pines leaning in to hear themselves. Caddo lay slate and indifferent and the herons stood like needles trying to remember their thread. A flatbed ahead of me lost a blue tarp, and the tarp skated off into the grass, shivering like a fish out of water, and I thought then of how often we lose the cover we brought and what the wilder air does when it glances off our plans. I pulled into the lot and the hotel looked like a picture taken 1 second before someone blinked. Miss Shirley counted out cash at the desk. She wore a blouse the color of poured cement and had a little smear of powdered sugar at the corner of her mouth from a donut she said she hadn't eaten. She handed me an envelope and took my key. She glanced at the clock. She squinted at the open door to the hall that led to 213 and pressed her lips together as if considering whether to tell me something and then deciding someone else already had. She said, "Lock up when you go." She said it softly as if I were staying. I nodded. The sky at the windows had gotten that late amber that makes all buildings confess their seams. I did not go to 213. I sat. The lobby grew very quiet. The old Pelican umbrella stand loomed as if it had eaten what it was supposed to hold. The cuckoo clock clicked without announcing anything. My phone on the desk beside the ledger hummed, and when I looked at it, I saw I had left the camera running unconsciously. That there were hours of the lobby at rest sitting there, and the tiny preview showed me sitting where I was while a moth traced the same mistake over and over on the window. I watched the live image of myself watching the image and I thought, this is what the hotel wants. It wants witnesses to their own witnessing. It wants to turn you into a hallway for the past to pass through on its way to your future. I shut off the phone and then the knock came, and this time it came like it had been waiting to be asked. Like a church bell decides you've taken your time. Not 3 taps. A hail, a call. The kind of knock a father uses when he's trying not to scare you with how scared he is. It came from the door to the street. The glass panes in that door trembled and the brass handle shivered. I could see the street empty. I could see my own shape in the glass, my shoulders a little forward, the way they always are when I'm expecting bad news. I did not stand. I did not answer. I put my hands on the ledger and held on like it was a steering wheel, and the road ahead had turned to water. A laugh drifted down, not the round marble sound, a woman's laugh, low and familiar and wrong where it was. The laugh braided with a sound like rainfall in a pipe, and the tick of the frozen grandfather clock said nothing, and the cold came from the register beneath the desk and settled on my knees. I thought of my mother then. I won't make this into a story about her. That's not what this is, but I thought of the sound of her voice on a night when the power had gone out, saying we were rich because the candles had lasted the storm and we were poor because of everything else. I thought I could hear her say my name softly in the corner of the lobby, and I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I almost liked it. The knock at the door came again, one hard smack that made the brass twist. I stood up. I walked around the desk. I put my hand on the door handle and it was warm. The heat startled me. I had been living in cold so long it felt like my only friend. I looked through the pane and saw only a lake made of street. The neon sign flipped backward in total. I imagined the man from the room standing on the step with his tool bag. I imagined the child pressing his lips to the glass. I imagined my own face, a second slow in the reflection, closing the loop with me. I did not open the door. I knocked back, 3 times with my knuckles. The sound was dull in the thick glass, like knocking on the lid of a slow animal. Someone answered from behind me in the hall to the 200 wing. I turned. I didn't hear the first step. I saw the change in the air, the way cold braids itself into the ordinary. And then the laughter rolled forward like it had been waiting on the stairs counting to 10. The 213 door stood open. I hadn't opened it. I swear to you. I know what I've admitted. I know I opened it before. Not this time. The door was simply open. The room beyond looked the way a lake looks when you can't find where color begins. The neon vacancy burned in the window like fire that can't catch anything. I went to the doorway and the cold set my lungs on a different clock. The sink turned on without ceremony and the mirror in the bathroom showed nothing. Not a smear, not a shadow. An absence so complete it had heft. A laugh came from the closet. The kind of laugh a child makes when someone says they'll pretend not to find him and means it. I said, "No." My voice shook. It bothered me that it shook. I wanted my voice to be the one good thing I had left. I said it again and the laughing stopped like a hand had cupped it. The cold fell harder. I smelled river. I tasted metal. I heard the old building gather itself, the way a person does when they're about to stand. The door to the closet shifted an inch, a shy motion. And I thought then of all the knocking, all the doors, all the polite calls for entrance we tell ourselves we own. I thought of what Miss Shirley had said about water, and what the estate sale woman had said about pressure and names. I thought of the cross out on the number 3 in the work order. 3 taps, 3 men down in the alley water, 3 laughs in a woman's throat, 3 steps from the bed to the closet and back, marked by wet prints that start and stop without moving. 3 is a number that pretends it knows how to end. I shut the door. I shut it gently and I did not lock it. I took the hotel's master key in my palm and held it until the teeth bit in. I walked back down the hall, down the stairs, into the lobby, and I sat. I wrote my name in the ledger and the date and the words "close the door," and beneath that "don't answer the knock," and I put the key on the desk like a child puts down a toy he wishes were heavier. Then I did the only thing I knew might work. I went live. That's what you're watching now if you're watching. I set the phone up on the little brass easel we use for brochures and I turned the camera toward me. And I said my name and my town the way people do when they're trying to be both credible and real. I said I had never told anyone, but I wanted you to hear it. And I told the story to the best of my ability without adding sugar or salt. I told it like a person would tell another person how to back out of a narrow driveway without taking off their mirror. The thing about telling is that it draws things to you. Words are a kind of knock. The lobby grew colder as I spoke. The laugh threaded in and out and I kept going. I said the address of the hotel and the room number and I said, "Don't go up there tonight," and I said, "Don't go up there alone." I said, "If you hear knocking from an empty room, don't be a gentleman." I said, "If you smell water where there shouldn't be any, leave." I said, "If someone says your name in a voice like a faucet getting ready to spit, do not answer." I said it because I wanted to say it out loud to one other person. Because a thing is different when there's more than one of you holding it. The last thing I saw before the camera shook was the pelican stand tipping, like it had been nudged by a child running past. It fell in a slow curve, a black metal bird learning to fly, and it hit the floor with a sound that lived in the brass bell on the desk, and the bell made its bright voice. 3 times. It made its voice like a small, brave animal calling in a forest. It made its voice again. Then the feed caught the door behind me, the street door, the one I had not opened. It opened then by itself, slow and legal, and the air that came in was not night air, but water, and the smell of it was not lake exactly, but the smell of something that has been waiting in the dark and has no particular grudge against you, beyond your willingness to stand where it needs to go. It came in without a shape. It came in as a temperature. It came in as a sound your body knows before your mind does. If you watch closely, you can see how my reflection in the glass moves half a beat behind me when I turn. You can see how I put my hand out the way a person does when they are trying to persuade a dog not to bite. You can see the way the door closes and the latch catches and the cold sets down to stay. You can't see the knock in the recording that came after that, because the microphone lost its nerve. You can only see me hear it. That's the part that bothers me still. Watching myself listen. There's a reason I'm speaking now and not calling. There's a reason you're hearing this from a screen, with the slider down there and the comments already filled with people explaining me to myself. The reason is simple and plays like a joke at first. The loudest ghost in Jefferson is the town, but the town needed a mouth. The hotel needed someone to say the warning with sincerity enough to keep the door closed for one more night. The knock needs answering, not by opening, by telling, by making the sound that carries, by taking the cold that comes into you and making heat from it, by the friction of words on air. That's the bargain the hotel makes when it's tired of drowning men named Rhodes. It picks a clerk who needs to make himself useful, a boy from Uncertain who never has enough money and always has enough of other people's stories in his pockets. It gives him a ledger and a bell and a set of keys and a hallway and a room that teaches him about the difference between a thing that invites you and a thing that informs you it has arrived. It lets him stand there until he understands that the only way to keep the door shut is to knock somewhere else, louder, and tell strangers not to answer. So don't answer the knock. If you're in Jefferson tonight, if you're near Austin Street and you see the neon flicker, if you're drunk enough on memory to think going in would be a story to take home, let it be the story I'm giving you now. Let it be this. The cold will feel friendly at first. The laughter will sound like someone else's children in the next room. The door will have your name on it because everything does when you've decided to take it personally. Don't go. Don't put your ear to the wood. Don't give your name to the faucet. And if a child's mouth presses a round ghost of itself against the glass, remember that glass belongs to both sides equally. Remember that a knock is not always a question. As for me, I'm done with it now. I have said the words and let them go. The camera shows me what it wants. Maybe you'll see the door move behind me. Maybe you'll say it's a draft. Maybe you'll say I needed help. Maybe you'll say you can hear the lake in my voice. You won't be wrong. My name is Dean Runnels and I'm from Uncertain, Texas. And what came knocking has learned my name enough to leave a wet mark where I sit. But I learned something too. I learned the tone a town takes when it wants you to live. I learned the only way to refuse an invitation like the one in 213 is to knock on the world around you and make your warning louder than the ask. I learned that the hotel does not want your fear. It wants your attention. And the only currency we have for attention, the only coin that wipes dry and stays in a pocket when everything else is heavy with water, is the way we say a thing and mean it. So mean it with me. Just this once, the way you mean a prayer you hope will make it down a hall and under a door, and into the ear of a person whose feet are already wet. Don't answer the knock. Don't answer the knock. Don't answer the knock. The bell rings behind me when I say it the third time. The pelican stand rights itself. The neon steadies. The cold loosens its hand in my chest. And from the closet in 2 and 13, 3 floors away by my heart's reckoning, a small person sighs the way a child sighs when the game is over, and a man with a tool bag sets it down very softly, and the sink gives up its last cough, and the mirror shows what mirrors show when they have nothing left to hide, which is your face. Watching, which is the town. Listening, which is the door, waiting for you to lift your hand and prove what you've heard.